Yes, I'd like to actually take a moment of silence to recognize the passing of Pat Nowak. Pat was a long-term city councilor with the city of South Burlington. I know I had the pleasure and opportunity to work with her for a number of years, and she was a recognized fixture in town and an incredible tenure of service to the community as well. So if we could just take a moment of silence, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. All right, we will take comments from the public regarding items that are not on the agenda. All right, seeing none. David, do we have amendments to the agenda?
I don't believe we have any amendments, unless maybe there was one that I heard maybe that might need to be. We could, honestly, I don't think we need number 6, because we're going to do a lot of conversation with the city on 6.
All right.
So I think we'll be all right to take that one off.
So we'll take agenda item 6 off, as we're covering a lot of the content in agenda item 7, I believe.
Correct.
Anything else? All right. Announcements and our student representative report. Arnell?
They have designated slots where sophomores through seniors and freshmen can go in and talk to a bunch of companies and have opportunities. Also recently, the Japanese TIE exchange students left. They recently left, but I thought their tenure here was really cool. They visited a bunch of different schools and worked with students, and I know particularly like elementary students had a lot of fun with them. Also, I don't know if it was this Saturday or the last Saturday, but there was the Vermont State Math and Science Fair, where sophomore students that are in a biology class participate, but also any students that want to, and our school actually did very well. We got about 37 awards, and most notably, Noliana Roop, I think, and Bambi were selected to an all-paid expense trip to Genius Olympiad in New York later this year, and Avi Cohen and Anna Oblock were selected to go to the International Science and Engineering Fair in Pittsburgh, which I remember last year I participated in that, and those awards were really fun. And then also I just kind of wanted to update you on what Student Council is working on in the high school. Usually this time of the year we have a Spirit Week, but this year we decided to change that to what we call a Speak Week because of all the controversies and events that are going on across the country. We decided to have a week long, and this will be the week before break, so I think in 2 weeks, where all throughout the week there's going to be a bunch of different seminars and groups that are going to be talking about a wide variety of different topics. I don't know exactly, we're still working on it, which will lead up to the walkout, which is happening next Friday. So I know that's really interesting, and I think a new thing that we've never done before, so that's also a little exciting, and hopefully that week's going to be successful.
Great.
So that's it.
Other announcements? I know one I wanted to mention is there's a community conversation on scheduled for April 17th at 6:30. I know I have a conflict on that date, so I'm hoping there can be some other board representation there. That's great. And for the community, this is a follow-up to the community conversation that was held at the, is it Vibrant Church?
What church was it? Yep. Yes.
Yes, sorry. Thank you, Patrick. On Williston Road, and Lisa Bettinger, who works with our restorative justice program, facilitates that smaller group conversations, and it's a nice opportunity to connect and share experiences, and it was well received last year, so I'd encourage everyone to attend. All right, we'll move on to agenda item 7. Do you want to preface this, David, or do you want me to speak to?
Sure.
This is in regard to the letter of intent that was received from the city to the school district regarding land exchange at Rick Marcotte Central School. I think this was received on, it's dated March 14th. And I think the city council approved this to send. You remember, Tom?
Yes.
Do you remember the date on that?
It was probably the meeting prior to that.
Okay.
The date of that, the first meeting in March.
Okay, and then I know there was, we got this the Monday before our regularly scheduled meeting last time, so I know at the last meeting, we indicated that the district was in receipt of the letter and that we would post this for discussion, and we have warned this for possible action today as well. So I think the way we're gonna run through this is, I do wanna welcome Tom Hubbard from the city and Alana Blanchard, who are gonna provide an update to the school board and the public who are here on an overview of the request. We have invited also next David Rue, who is counsel to the board, to provide an update on the status and the history of this request. I know David and I, to some extent, can subsequently provide an overview of some of the school district priorities, and then we'll open this up for board discussion, and then have an opportunity for public comment and questions as well at the end of that. So I would ask everyone if you could hold your questions till we get through those presentations, so we'll all share the same information as we go into discussion. All right, Tom, welcome.
And thank you for your comments and thoughts regarding Pat. She'll certainly be missed. And we are planning a resolution for her and a get-together with her family at the next council meeting on April 16th, starting at 6:30. And the public's obviously invited, and our thoughts and prayers are with her family at this time, so thank you. I'd like to give just a brief introduction. I'm really going to turn this over to Alana Blanchard, who's our project director and all things City Center related. But I'm filling in for Kevin tonight. Kevin's away and enjoying vacation that's well deserved, and so I'm operating off of some of his notes here. But we appreciate the opportunity to come before you tonight to discuss this in a little bit more detail and answer any questions that you might have. Hopefully the presentation tonight will make it clear in terms of what it is that we're seeking. As you know, the city for some time now has been looking at the property next to Allard Square for a civic building site that would house the new community library, new city hall, and a senior center facility space. We've been working with designers for quite some time now and have come up with a proposed layout for the building that's been through a number of renditions and public meetings and input to lead us to this model here that you're looking at tonight. The property is, for those of you who are not familiar, the central school building. It's to the back end of the parking lot. Market Street's on the other side. And literally the building that's going up there now on Market Street, this is the property adjacent to that, nearest the current entrance to the Rick Marcotte Central School property. This proposed transfer of land is really what we're looking for from the school board, is a unique opportunity for our two entities to continue to work together on something that we feel is on behalf of the whole community. We feel this has some distinct benefits, and Alana will go into some of those, as well as some detail on the specific parcels that we're looking at, and some more detail about each of those. So I'll ask Alana to come in at this point and review those.
Thank you for the opportunity to present this. The design team, Wayman Lamfair and Humphreys Poley Architects, have been working very hard on this design with the whole community. They've received over 450 comments as of the last workshop, and they still are receiving more comments and continuing to refine the design. Mark, if you would help me, that would be wonderful, just by advancing the slides. So I have a few slides. I'd like to walk you through the proposal, and also you know, this is very much the early stage of the project. At the same time, it's a project on a tight timeline. So we're working towards development so that we can open the doors in 2020, in the spring of 2020. So next slide. This shows you the concept that was that was exhibits the most preferred options on the ground floor. So the bulk of the children's library, or all of the children's library, is on the ground floor. The auditorium and senior center, as well as an inviting lobby space. The building has a very strong presence on the street, as you saw from the prior slide, but it also has an orientation towards the school to facilitate interaction between the two buildings and the two community uses to take advantage of their proximity. And you can see Allard Square to the left is that white shape, and that the swoop shape is a driveway. Thank you. All right, here we go. So this is the children's library here. This is the front door off of Market Street. This is the entrance to the school driveway, and this is the relocated school driveway off of, right now it goes like this. So this is the site that the city has an option on right here. The ground floor entrance, lobby, clerk's office, auditorium, senior center. Now these spaces are where they're shown now. This is what we know needs to go on the ground floor, but where it is exactly is still being developed, and then the children's library. And so next slide. So this shows an exterior rendition. It's 3 stories. With the adult collection on the second floor, and then City Hall and some public community meeting spaces on the 3rd floor and 2nd floor to facilitate civic activity. Next slide. So this is the exhibit for the letter of intent. So I just wanted to go through it, make sure that it's crystal clear. So Market Street, the new, the right-of-way for the planned Garden Street, and this right here is the Rick Marcotte Central School, and you can't really tell on the screen. This green shape here is the parcel that we have a letter, an option on from South Burlington City Center LLC. This is an adjacent vacant parcel that they have reserved for the future right-of-way for a future street. And then this is the land that we have identified in the letter of intent as parcel number 1 that we would like to discuss, that we would like to come to an agreement on. And then parcel number 3 is an additional parcel that we also would like to come to agreement on. This is a parcel that will facilitate larger vehicles on using Garden Street. So, for example, any vehicle that has a large wheelbase and needs a lot of space to make a turn. So, like a bus or a trailer or anything like that. So that would facilitate that curve. Next slide. And so this shows the concept in context on our site. Next slide. So the design team has been very much focused on the building, but they've also been saying, how does this fit into the context? And so this is an idea of how that might work. Sort of how do we make everyone whole and make everything relate to each other? So, you know, this is a new street that would continue access to the whole Rick Marcotte Central School property. This is Market Street right here. Here's the DMV. Here's the new Allard Square. This is the city library, senior center, and city hall proposed. And then this right here is the Rick Marcotte Central School building. These are the 2 existing parking lots. What this shows is that we can retain all of the parking that's currently on the site and add additional parking. And so this parking lot and this parking lot combined, everything above this line shows 130 spaces. There's 131 spaces on this whole area today. And then below this line here, this shows an additional 19 spaces. did I say, so 131 today, and then above this line, 130 tomorrow, plus these additional spaces down here. So this proposal envisions a new access road, so not like a road, but more like the road that takes you into Barnes & Noble, so it has curbs, and it may have sidewalk in some portions, but only where you really need it, where you expect people to be walking, but is really to access parking areas, but then would continue and provide everything within this area access to Mary Street. And if you're not familiar with Mary Street, it will have a future access at the end of this summer to Market Street, and then has an access today onto Wilson Road. This also envisions additional sidewalk that would go along this new street, along the back of the building, and then connect across the drive aisle right here, and then connect directly to this school entrance. And then additional queuing space extending this queuing area here for drop-off to the end of this parking lot. This is really just an engineer sitting down and saying, you know, what would I do with this space? Not really having a conversation about it, but it provides important connectivity between the two buildings, so there would be a rear access. It also facilitates the proper functioning of the library so that you have direct access to drop books off for processing, for circulation. And provides some handicapped access at the rear of the building for many who are less able-bodied. So, another important aspect is that it provides an access for the Allard Square property, senior housing that's right here, without this access having to go under the building, which is makes the building much more financially feasible than if this access went under the building. And it also, yeah, so I think those are the main aspects. I'm not sure if I have another slide. I think this is it. Yep, okay. So that concludes the presentation.
Thank you. I think we'll probably want to leave this one up, because I think there'll be some questions on that.
The larger Marcotte property slide is best.
You want to pull
like
that
the
one
one
up?
or two before it. The one that shows 3 parcels. Yeah, that's
Here, you
And
stand up here, you can.
I'm sorry, I should have turned it over.
No,
sorry.
just to conclude, so really what we're seeking is an agreement with the board with some assurance that a letter of intent or some type of an agreement can be worked out for us to move forward with this. We're on a path right now, if all things align properly, to take this to the voters in November. Where we're at in the design process right now is critical to an agreement, or at least some movement towards an agreement. So, I guess what we need to find out tonight is there agreement to move forward to getting a letter of intent put together to make this a reality? And if there's not at this point, that's important for us to know so that we can go back and rework the design with folks to determine whether or not some other type of configuration of the site or the facility is feasible and or affordable. So that's kind of where we're at. Thank you.
So, David?
For the board and the public, I'm David Rue. I'm from Stitzel, Page and Fletcher, counsel to the board. I wanted to go over just briefly some of the history about this letter of intent proposal. During the school district's master planning and visioning process, there's been a number of proposals between the city and the school district about exchanging property, but none have come to fruition. More recently, this past summer, city staff and district staff began discussing land exchange that would involve land from a Marcotte school going to the city. In exchange, there would be, the city would provide permanent access to the school district And the school district might also have an opportunity to own, lease, or use other city property. There's been a number of different concept proposals for this land exchange, and the letter of intent discussed between staff. And the parties began to focus their discussions on a proposal whereby the city would acquire parcel 1, as we've been talking about, which is 0.7 acres of land to build the new community center. In exchange, one proposal was for the school district to receive deeded access right here to Marcotte School from Market Street, either through an easement or a new public roadway. Also previously discussed was the school district acquiring this parcel of land over here near Midas Drive, which could also provide access if an access drive was built all the way across. That parcel over towards Midas Drive is roughly equivalent in size to parcel 1. The second parcel, as Alana mentioned, if it were to be conveyed to the school district as part of an earlier proposal, would have been subject to the city's right to build future Garden Street, which is a critical piece of the city center's infrastructure. Also included as part of the earlier proposal was the discussion between the city and the school district over a memorandum of understanding, whereby the school district might be able to negotiate the use of what is the current city hall property upon the city moving its offices into the new city hall library space. By mid-August of last year, the city council approved a letter of intent, sending a letter of intent to the school district with those terms. The school district considered that letter of intent and made a counter proposal because some of the terms in that letter of intent weren't consistent with the school district's priorities, including the master planning and visiting process, some safety and security issues, and the district's need for additional space. The school district made an alternate proposal that was not too different in concept, but it was designed to address those priorities, including a right of reversion for parcel 1 if the city's project never went forward, as well as a commitment that the school district could indeed use the current city hall property if the project went forward. During these discussions back in the summer, it seemed critical that the city reach an agreement on the LOI by early September of 2017. But upon receipt of the school district's counter proposal, the discussions were tabled, and the school district didn't hear anything further on the LOI. Although shortly thereafter, the city did pull the library out of the high school and moved it to University Mall. Fast forward 6 months till today, or roughly today, back on March 14th, the school district received this current land exchange proposal through a letter of intent. It's pared down, as you can note from what was discussed over this past summer. No longer is this parcel be part of the deal, nor has the city proposed that the school district could use or make a commitment that the school district could use the current city hall property when this project moves forward. All the city has proposed in exchange for the conveyance of this land right here from Marcotte School is access to the Marcotte School property. There was no reciprocal property being proposed to be given to the school district. Also, there's no mention of need for space or anything to address some of the recent security concerns or master planning and visioning items that were discussed. Also important to know is, as Elizabeth mentioned earlier, the school district received the letter of intent roughly August 15th, 16th, 17th, somewhere in that time period, and the city wanted a response from the school district almost immediately on April 1st. As you may have read in the other paper, the school district was not able to meet that very tight timeline and told the city that if that deadline was critical to moving forward with the project, the school district couldn't go forward. It needed more time to discuss the particulars, and that's why we're here this evening.
David, do you want to give an update on some of the school priorities right now before we open this up for discussion?
Sure. So I think, again, a lot of people are aware that within the district, we have a multitude of things going on. And I think just to highlight, Elizabeth, around master planning and visioning is probably the area that, I'll focus on. Master planning and visioning conversations have been going on for a while, all the way back to 2004, 8, and 15. But we're at a place, I think, currently, given some guidance from the board, to do a deeper dive, and we're very close to coming to that end. A few highlights of the master planning and visioning. We are currently undergoing some sound testing at the Chamberlain School based on what's been existing noise at the Chamberlain Elementary School for a long time. So that we're going to have some sound testing done during this month. Soon, ATC will be doing that testing. In addition, we've done electrical and mechanical and structural analysis of both the high school and the middle school, and we've just received back those cost estimates, and we'll be soon to be sharing that out with the public. And then, in addition, we've been looking at the things within our budget, and again, we're fortunate that the community supported our budget, and so we do need to figure out how we repurpose space currently vacated by the city to repurpose the high school library. And then last but not least, certainly a pretty significant a response needed around safety and security as a result of some of the national related issues happening to ensure safety of our students in all 5 schools. So the timeline for us, for me right now, to give back to the board with administrative help is looking at the end of this month. I think we do have a couple board members that are subcommittee with me that are working, to, kind of do some pre-conversation and making sure we're hitting the mark. But currently, we're planned right now for the end of April, first part of May, to provide that a pretty significant report out. Again, looking at demographics, looking at student outcomes, looking at cost, looking at facilities, facility stewardship for the long term, and certainly, last but not least, looking at all of the current needs related to how we can upgrade safety and security. So those are what I would say the topical areas that are specific to the master planning and visioning. Although I understand the request, part of our this is a component of that equation as we look at what do we need both now and in the long term. So every bit of space currently is in need, and in fact we've worked with the city too on looking at additional spaces or other spaces. And those of you who've been around, you know of Oak Creek Village as a possible site, and the footprint we would need if we were to do something. So that's also part of the equation. So I don't know if you have other things you wanted updates on, Elizabeth, or board members.
And what's the, on the Chamberlain, there's sort of 2 arms there. One is our own noise study, which is going to be completed when? Can we just clarify that date?
Yeah, so it's during the month of April. A lot of that's done. So we have dates that we've identified that we can do the sound testing. So it has to be, number 1, when planes are flying. 2, it has to be at temperatures that are above freezing. So we've targeted probably 8 or 9 dates, and we've sent home correspondence to parents and letting them know it could be any one of these dates. And the tester will be ATC. So that's on our end, and we're paying for that service. In addition, which I will also cover later on in the agenda, is our current request to the Burlington International Airport and the FAA to do sound insulation at the Chamberlain School. It qualified back in 2015, and we'd like to see it get done as soon as possible to lessen that noise burden to our students. And so we've written a series of correspondence and requests to get that done, but those are around the same issue, but going through FAA and the airport, and we're doing our own due diligence on figuring out sound.
So the probability on that report from ATC would likely be in the May timeframe?
Well, we'd like to see if we could get it back towards the end of April, depending on, there's going to be 2 testing dates, one to do, provide and then validate. It's probably somewhat unrealistic at the end of April, but certainly in the first week or 2 of May, we'd like to have that data back that would inform a lot of our decision-making within the same master planning and visioning work that is important. As far as getting any sort of affirmation, validation from the FAA or the airport, I'm not sure, on what that prognosis will be, but we're continuing. And again, the airport folks have been supportive in working with us again, but yet we're not successful in getting the school sound insulated.
Okay, if we could kind of open it up for board questions. I have a quick question on if we could go back to the overall schematic, the last slide. I don't know if you can drive that, David. And Tom or Alana, I don't know if you can answer this just yet.
This one?
It would be the last one.
The very last
That
slide?
shows the, yeah. My question is really where,
Next one, David,
Yeah.
after this.
yeah, where is the parking for the library? And, yeah, actually, that's just, where is the parking and how many
Yeah,
spaces is
So,
this?
so we're looking at options separate from this project for parking for the library. I mean, obviously, there's some on-street parking, but we recognize that City Center needs public parking, and so it's obviously not going to be on our site, but it's surrounded. Our site is surrounded by many other sites, and so not this design team, but another design. But within the city, we're looking at that as a project, and once we have a secured site, then we'll start talking about it.
But this schematic does not include dedicated library parking. Is that accurate?
The parking that is south of the drive aisle on the right-hand side would most likely be used the most by library patrons. What this slide does include is that we would do stormwater treatment. Most likely, we would need to do stormwater treatment for all of the new parking, as well as to a percentage of the existing parking which does not have stormwater treatment today. So we can't, it would be difficult to add additional, although we don't know how many spaces it would end up being. But that area, any parking in that area would most likely be the parking that patrons would feel comfortable using.
And that was, just to clarify, that was included in your assessment of the net parking spaces?
No, so the 130 is everything above this drive aisle. And then there's 19 spaces on both sides of this access, so.
So it's those spaces that are on 2 sides?
No, this is
Of the ramp?
9 spaces. This shows 9 spaces, this illustration shows 9 spaces. Obviously, you could have less sidewalk and more parking. And this, I believe, shows 10.
So it's on the side of that ramp down to the garage?
Right, it's on the other side. It probably is more likely to be used by school or Allard Square patrons than by library patrons.
And then
there's also
traffic flow, Alana, would come in and share the access road up to those 9 parking spaces,
correct,
basically.
right, and it could also come this way.
You may not have the answer to this. How many parking spaces does Allard Square have? So do they have some, are they having some underneath or?
Yes, so they have parking underneath, and then they have parking in this lot, on their land.
We continue to have discussions with owners of adjacent properties about parking structure, and those are ongoing at this point.
And that's helpful.
Is about twice as big as the existing footprint.
The current footprint, you can see this line right here. So it's it's 3. It has 3 rows of cars, and this adds an additional 2 rows.
Oh, so that's a diagram that adds parking on the school property
Same.
in order to get to those.
Yeah, this is
Right.
what,
numbers.
this is what we
Yes,
have.
This is the one that, yes.
What
So
we have right
we're
now
going
is
out
that.
into the playing fields to get
Yeah.
this additional
Playground
parking.
No,
becomes-
You touched it?
Go back to the slide.
Now we gotta go back to
It
that.
goes, it takes up playground space, it's not really the, it doesn't get as far as the playing fields.
Right.
It cuts up to the, there's like a few trees there,
Right.
that cuts some of the grassy area off.
yeah, and I did fail to mention, if we go to the last slide,
You know which one you're going to? Can we just touch this?
Yeah.
Oh, look at the smart board. Yeah, no, I was gonna try it. Is that the one you wanted?
yeah, so this area here has, I think it has a fence and grass, but it's not really functional. But then this corner right here, there is a playing field, and that would need to slide over, so that would need to be reconfigured.
And the LOI that the board has in front of it tonight does not include any of these improvements that are,
So we think
Mention
that
that.
should all be part of the discussion. I mean, we don't, yeah, I mean, one of the opportunities by developing an agreement is to sit down and work these issues out. But this is just to show that there are options to resolve this, so.
other board questions?
Yeah,
Alex?
Alana, I think you mentioned that the person who designed this did not put in sidewalks there. And with this being a driveway to a school, I can tell you, I think sidewalks are going to be absolutely crucial.
Yeah.
And certainly having Market Street and the driveway in the condition it is,
Let me
Go
explain
ahead.
where the sidewalks are. So the sidewalk comes, so we would expect people to take Market Street,
yeah,
and then there's a sidewalk alongside Market Street, and it's alongside the building.
mm-hmm,
So on the outside of the parking, and then there would be a crosswalk across the drive aisle that goes straight up to the school. So if it made sense to have sidewalks in other areas, this seemed to be the most direct route where you would want to direct people to walk as opposed to across parking. And there's so many accesses to the drive aisle at other locations that I believe that they were recommending that it be on the outside and then up through the center.
uh-huh. What I'm recommending is a sidewalk on the right side of that diagram
Across,
with an
Yeah.
access that goes to the school
yeah,
without having to cross any parking lots or driveways.
yeah, that makes sense.
It's a pretty minor detail, but this is also, keep in mind that residential units are planned for this city center project, and I'm sure people who buy units there are gonna look forward to having their kids be able to walk to school.
Definitely.
So one fundamental question I had is the design, was this the preferred design that came back from this community feedback on the City Hall library structure?
On the City Hall library structure, yes. This part of the concept was not discussed with the community. We felt that it should be discussed with the school board first.
Was the design, I don't know.
If we go
It's not a-
back,
It's not a nice way to say it, but were there any design options that excluded the parcel of land that the school owns right now?
so go back, if you could, I don't know if I should ask you to go back. But, so this is generally what the community looked at. So the school site is acknowledged as being at the back. And the interest in having a relationship between the building and the school site and the school itself. But it is not, but the actual parking layout and things like that was not discussed with the community.
So there's actually no building on the land that
Correct.
is in the LOI?
Correct.
It's really the access
Correct.
side of it, okay.
We did show an option that did have building off of the site, but that was not the one that we ended up with.
Other questions, concerns?
So I guess this is a clarification question more than anything. So my understanding is basically what the district is being offered in exchange is permanent access to the Rick Marcotte site. My understanding was that the DRB's decision to subdivide the property made sure that anybody who built on this property had to provide permanent access to the Rick Marcotte site. So really, we're sort of being granted something that was already predetermined. So is that true? Is it true that anyone who builds there would need to build to ensure that there was access from Market Street into the property?
I can't answer that.
Okay.
I can't give you a definite on that, Bridget.
Okay.
I mean, it's private land.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure, well, for reasons David would understand, I can't talk about that here.
Bridget, if you'd like, my understanding is that there is a condition of approval in a DRB decision that requires the dedication of a public road right-of-way on the east side of that South Burlington City Center property that resulted from the subdivision that created the Allard Square property and this other property. Now, whether a road gets built there or the city council accepts that road immediately or what as part of that is up for debate, but there is a condition that requires the dedication of a right-of-way in generally that location. And it's been shown on the official map for many years that a public road would be placed there.
And David, maybe you can answer this question too. What, my understanding from previous discussions when we were talking in master planning and visioning was any real estate matters that the school district might engage in do require voter approval. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. The school districts are subject to the provisions of 16 VSA 563, and I think it's subsection 7, that requires, among other things, voter approval for the purchase or sale of, quote, school sites, end quote. The Marcotte School is one large parcel of land that was acquired in separate pieces many years ago, but in order for the school district to convey parcel 1 or parcel 3 to the city, we believe voter approval would be required to do that.
This may be a question, I don't know, Alana or Tom, if you can answer this, but some of the feedback that the school board received relative to the move of out of the high school into the U Mall as an interim step was due to patrons' concern about having students or sharing space with students. Yet the LOI highlights one of the benefits of this library is inviting elementary students into the library. And I know, I guess I'm wondering how are patrons' needs being addressed from that standpoint, as well as the fact that there is a concern, I know, we've had, when the library was over here, we would have often kids who were being picked up late from practice and stuff stay in the library, and that would become a concern with elementary age students in the space there. But I guess the patrons' concern, there were two that I know that were highlighted for me. One was sharing the space, and the other was specific to the lockdown that occurred last year that impacted the library because it was in the high school space. And I don't know what the public space being near a school, I don't know what, and you may not know either, but that would be a concern that would the same environment exist being near a school and being another public facility in the event of an event of some kind.
Do you want me to answer this? Can I answer the first one? Or you answer the first one? I think Jennifer, I know you directed it at myself and Tom, but I think that
That
I'm
would be
Jennifer
great.
Murray, the library director.
Jennifer.
And so having been in the high school space with my colleagues and now proposing this possibility, I think that patrons, indeed, the lockdown was, I think, a catalyst. But in regular day-to-day operations, I think the time period that was the most challenging was that 10 to 10:30 period when the high school students filled the library, and there really was no seating and no way for the public to use the library at the same time. But I think that while there might be some people who might not like students of any age, and certainly the designs that we're looking at do include quiet adult reading spaces as well as intergenerational interactive spaces, I think that there were also a lot of the public who missed the students now that we are not there, because that was their opportunity to talk with and be around the energy of high school students. Does that help?
Yeah, a little bit. I don't know if any of the other board members have questions. It struck me as kind of ironic that there was that feedback, but it wasn't as specific as you've said in that time period.
So the elementary students would be using the children's area, and if they came after school, and whether they came around or whether they came through the back, we would have programming for them in the children's area. We're hoping to have spaces as you come into the library where, for instance, right now at the mall, we have 3 poetry stations so that you can write poetry in 3 different ways, and that's for all ages. So we would hope to have that so that people who want to interact with whatever ages can do that. And then the designers have in mind that there'll be some kind of an entryway into a children's area that is enclosed, partly so that you have toddlers who don't run off and land in the street. And so there'll be options. There are the options to engage, or there are the options for the students to be in that children's area and be just working with the children's librarian or reading or doing whatever they want to do. But I think that the majority of people in South Burlington enjoy multi-generational interaction, but there are certainly people who don't.
There are spaces proposed within the library that have a teen room and a tween room and such. We're certainly looking for ways that those kinds of opportunities can be presented, even with the senior center. It's part of the idea of locating it close to the school building so that there is a government central area, if you will. So we're looking for those kinds of interactions to happen. I think the way that the layout of the library at the high school wasn't conducive to the ideal working of a current day community library.
Martin?
I just want to be clear on a couple things here. So the parcel 1, the purpose for that, for the library, would be for drop-off and for some parking, and also an entryway to the residences next door. Is that kind of sum up? I mean, it's not for the building itself.
And potential access to Mary Street.
Potential access to Mary Street, okay. And so I guess the question is, I mean, how critical is that? Because that has to be weighed against something we haven't gotten into as much on the school district's potential needs going forward for that property. I mean, is that, Tom, you mentioned that if we couldn't come to an agreement, you'd have to be looking at the design again. I'm just trying to get a sense of that, so when we're doing this balancing.
There's a requirement for us to provide access to Allard Square. If we didn't have room to go behind Martin, we would probably need to do that underneath the building, which would make it cost prohibitive to utilize that site. So to be able.
I'm sorry, just Allard Square being the residence next door.
Yeah. So if the road, if the extension of the land doesn't allow for that road to flow behind the public facility space, they would have to go underneath the building. That's the only other option we would have to provide them the access that they would need. We would have a legal challenge if we didn't
So-
provide that.
I mean, well, the fact that
Well-
we only, the fact that we got this a couple weeks ago and we're given like days to figure out by April 1st what to do is
David,
one
You
thing.
need to weigh in there,
But, well,
please.
what we got with an April 1st deadline. But beyond that, you know, putting the library aside, I mean, how long has the Allard Square project been going on with this understanding that apparently school property was needed to make it cost-effective? I mean, that just is a
It
little
wasn't,
troublesome.
Martin, Until
Okay,
the
all right.
city decided that the location next to Allard Square was a viable, affordable option for us to put a public facility there. We then had to work with Allard Square to provide the access that they were gonna need to be able to get to their facility.
Off of Market Street, like between where, all right,
Right.
all right, thank you for
Yep.
that clarification. That's helpful, thank
Yeah,
you.
but Allard Square alone had no impact on the school property.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
But David, you know, we've had conversations about this for a good long while. Elizabeth, I know you've been involved with sessions with Helen and Kevin, that these discussions have come up. The impression is being given here that the city has sprung this on the school board, and I'd just like you both to weigh in here, to kind of give some clarification to
Yeah, I
that.
mean-
The intent was not to keep folks in the dark
Yeah,
and to spring this on you.
And we're not trying to put
Yeah.
either of you on the spot either, but the school board did submit a revised LOI back in August, and it was tabled for whatever reason, and then 6 months went by, and we were in receipt of this LOI with a 2-week time frame on it. So there were not discussions going on during that period, nor a response to the LOI that we had. And the challenge is the current LOI doesn't address any of the previous needs that the school has expressed relative to needs for space. New information has been forthcoming in that 6-month period relative to the district around safety and security issues. And then progress is being made on Chamberlain, such that we are going to be faced with a decision that if, let's just say, the noise levels, whether it's our study or the FAA study, come back, that it's detrimental to have a school site on that location, we are going to have to make some tough decisions with the spaces we do have for schools. So it's a struggle to consider giving up some space we currently have until we know what our space needs may be. And we're trying to be respectful of what might be a really exciting project for the community, but also that doesn't limit what space we might need on an interim basis to accommodate information that we don't have yet, that is at best going to be kind of in probably the late April, May timeframe at best. So that's the struggle. And again, the 6-month hiatus period, we don't know why we didn't get a response back in that period.
And I wasn't in the meetings with Kevin and Helen, but I know you're meeting at least monthly, maybe twice a month. That I would expect that those kinds of conversations could have been held. If there were questions about that you needed from the city, or if the school, you know, required additional information from us, we'd certainly be willing to provide it to you. I really don't want to lose fact of what we're asking for tonight. Is there a willingness on behalf of the school board, if the details of all these things can be worked out, to pursue some type of an agreement, whether that be a letter of intent or something similar, so that we can have at least an understanding, do we move forward with the current design, or do we start redesigning or look for alternate sites? We're at that point, and it's not a need to rush the school board into a decision. It's a matter of, is there a willingness to work together to try to make this work if it can work? And I guess that's the answer we need. I know that you've got the report coming out, David, soon, and we understand your priorities and our priorities are a little bit different, and they're not properly aligned, but that's we're two different entities. But is there potential here for an agreement on this, so that we have a sense whether or not we can continue on the track that we're on, or is this a definite no deal kind of situation? That's the guidance we're really looking for tonight.
What's the, you know, some of this is the tight window of time we're going to run into relative to this board getting data that allows us to kind of understand what the implications are for Chamberlain, so keeps some flexibility in the options open for David and his administrative team to make recommendations on how we handle that. But in order to have something on the ballot in November, how do we back into that? Because are we getting too close to that now?
We are.
And
Yeah.
that's.
I think the council has to have final design and cost estimate in May for November to be even realistic. And we're working up against the TIF deadline too. You know, we're, well over a year into the TIF already.
Yeah.
And we're paying for an option on the site. So we've got a number of factors that are kind of pushing us in terms of making a decision as to whether or not this is the right property. We feel that you'd rather have a civic building in your backyard than a 3 to 5 story building of either residential or commercial use. We think it's a compatible use. We think it makes sense, but help us out if it's not making sense. If this, it's not a huge piece of land that we're asking for here. We think that the additional access out to Mary Street would be a benefit to the school district, to have that roadway connect all the way through. We think there's a lot of compatible uses between elementary school students and the civic building, between the library, the senior center. We think there's spaces within the civic building, like the auditorium, that could be utilized by students at the central school. So we're thinking the site's a good one, but I'm not hearing a lot of feedback from you tonight that says we like the site. We think we can work with you on that, and that's what we need to hear. And if that's not the case, that's okay, but we need to, that's kind of what we're looking for. We need to know that.
And I think my concern is, and I'll speak for myself, I'd like other board members to weigh in. My concern is that there may be an interest, but the timing may be out of sync with what you need to accomplish this with the community. So that would be my concern, because if we may not have the information we need to give you a definitive answer, or even participate in a negotiation of an LOI. So, yeah, Ilana.
Sorry. So I did, just to go back to the question, there is a significant difference in how we would design the building if we have defined access to the rear or not. There's a difference in how the building would relate. So there would likely be no or real rear entrance or access from the back of the building to the school property. The building would be smaller, so it might not be as functional for various community and library uses. And it would be much more costly for the entire community. And I think we all recognize that we all serve the same community. And so in order to provide the council with a cost estimate that matches the design in May that the design team will recommend going forward with, we do need to know what the property and the accesses to the property look like, and how to make it relate to the community. What I showed you on the wall, that's a concept. So those are the types of things that can be worked out and hashed out. And I think, the LOI provides a framework. It is by no means an agreement. Would you agree? Yeah.
That's correct.
So And what we're really asking is, do we have a building that has a relationship to the back of the site? Or does it just relate to the front, or do we maybe even move it somewhere else?
And are there elements that you haven't seen tonight that you'd like to see included in the LOI? You know, that's the kind of feedback that we're looking for, we'd be receptive to.
I mean, I love the idea of having a library in City Center. Let me just start with that. I am bothered by the process of how this has come about and how much short time we have to do our due diligence, particularly since we're working on trying to figure out what our anticipated needs are right now. So really a timing issue. I think that one could take care of the safety issues. I mean, my initial impression is that I'm bothered by all of a sudden having what will essentially be a through road that adjoining the parking lots of Central School. That doesn't bother me so much, having lived in DC for a while, and there is much worse traffic in front of schools, and one can figure that out. But it takes time to figure that out as well. The other problem, and I'm hearing you as far as there could be further discussions, is, you know, what kind of consideration is the district getting in exchange for this? You know, again, the library's great as a citywide thing, but our first priority has to be making sure that we're keeping our school district the excellent place that it is, and we have these needs that are coming up. So, yeah, it's a tough situation that we're in.
Other board questions, comments? If you don't mind, Tom and Alana, I'm going to open it up for any public questions or comments. Yes.
Sort of new in town, so I don't know anything about this area of the town that was on the map. I'm just confused if I heard correctly that in an earlier round, the city wanted some things from the school district and was willing to give things in return, such as perhaps the current city hall space. It seems to me that suddenly, because something fell apart there, okay, we want this, and there's nothing in return, and that seems like a strange negotiating tactic. So I'm just confused as someone who's been involved in negotiating.
It's not off the table. It's not part of the drawing that's on here for tonight. And the decision for tonight is really whether or not we can move forward with a design that's currently being proposed for the site.
And to clarify, if I may, yeah, so to clarify, the original letter of intent was for multiple acres of land and included the woods area adjacent to the future Garden Street. And so our offer was our initial offer was much larger because we were asking for acres and acres of land and multiple building sites essentially on the 11-acre parcel. That helps.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're not.
Yes.
So I'm Margaret Ann Cross. I'm chair of the Library Board of Trustees. And I just want to thank you all for having such a robust discussion tonight and considering this request. We really do believe it's the best possible chance we have right now for a library that will serve our city's needs now and in the future. And just as a board, we just wanted to say that we're supportive of we want the best possible outcome for the school district as well as for the library. So thank you.
Thanks. Yes.
I'm Mark Cole. I'm also one of the library board members, and I'm also on the design committee. I've been working with Alana and Jennifer on the designs that you're looking at on the slides there. I guess one of the first issues that when I was looking at this, before any drawings were done, before the architects put pen to paper, was the issue of access and getting in and out of there. I'm also a parent who had 3 kids at Rick Marcotte, And I lived through the drop-offs, and I lived through the pickups. And I saw what was going on there in terms of the traffic and the buses coming in and out of there. And just imagining what life would be like with a single entrance going into the elementary school with that building sitting there. And I guess this proposal, what the city is proposing, would allow for another way, another ingress, egress point where the buses could get in and out of the parking lot without having to be involved in the traffic on the other side of the property. And I guess, just looking at this from a practical standpoint, the piece of property that we're talking about, this strip of land between Rick Marcotte and where the library is and where Allard Square is, while I guess on paper there would be a conveyance, from a practical standpoint, the parents of the school and the buses are still going to have access to that piece of property. In other words, that road will be usable by the whoever it is that's getting in and out of the school. So, you know, yes, we're asking for a conveyance, but the school will continue to have the use of that land. So hopefully that can be taken into consideration.
Yeah, David, do you want to offer any comments, observations?
You know, again, I think that this presentation has been helpful. I mean, I think when I think about it, it might have been better for us to have this a little earlier. I mean, I realized there was a lot of stuff going on with drafting it and coming up with that plan. This has been informative, you know, I think to the board and to the community around exactly some of the things that have been highlighted. So I think it's been helpful, and there's some takeaways, I think, for the board. I'm not exactly sure, you know, it's on here for action, Elizabeth. I'm not exactly sure, you know, you kind of have given kind of that May deadline, Tom, and so I'm not sure, you know, we've got another meeting on the 18th, you know, for us in May, so I'm not really sure what's needed and what timelines are available to you right now. From our board.
Is there a willingness to have further discussion about this, or is this a deal breaker as you've seen it proposed tonight? I think that would be helpful, as just some general guidance for this.
I'll speak for myself. I don't think, for me, anything that I've seen is a deal breaker, but the LOI in its current form isn't acceptable to me. And so, you know, I keep hearing assurances that there will be some discussion, but there are some pretty major elements that were discussed previously that are not represented in this LOI. And so I can't give you an answer tonight from my perspective that says, yes, I'm willing to move forward with this project in its current form. So that's kind of where I'm at. It all goes back to information. And I'm one of the people who's working with David on the subcommittee for master planning and visioning. There's a very real possibility we could get information back from Chamberlain by the end of the month that tells us not only is it too loud now, or will it be too loud when the F-35 comes, but it's too loud now and maybe too loud for insulation to make a difference. At that stage, we would be scrambling to find space at our other properties to try to house those kids and make sure that we're providing an equitable education for them. And that's where my priority is right now. I think a library would be wonderful. And I went to some of the early sessions before any designs were on the table, you know, where they were just showing us concepts. And it's very exciting to think about a library and think about it in city center. But the LOI as it is right now for me is not in a place where I would be willing to even say it needs to be tweaked. There are some significant things that are not in it that need to be in it if we were to move forward. And that's just my perspective, so I'll let others speak, but.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I wrestle with this again. I mean, I do not want to be an impediment to progress. I think we should generally try to work with the city as constructively as we can. But I just keep looking and looking and looking at this map, and basically this parcel just shoehorns against the building. I mean, it really constrains our existing footprint in a way. I mean, the parcel over here at the far end really doesn't, do anything as far as I'm concerned. So, but this one I think really sort of limits the possibilities that are available to us, particularly if we have to do something on short notice, which is like modular construction while we're trying to figure out how to respond if we have to leave the Chamberlain facility. So, and, you know, Elizabeth, I mean, you bring up a good point about just as time has passed, and it was 8 months now since the last time we corresponded with the city, and so we have had some, you know, national events happen that make us really, you know, wonder about the proximity of an elementary school to a lot more outside traffic, and, you know, how prudent that is. So I wrestle with this. I don't know if I can get comfortable with it. You know, it's just very, very challenging. And I would agree that I think the LOI as it's constructed, it just feels very one-sided. We're giving up a lot of, I think, flexibility, you know, for really no, I think, tangible or apparent benefits in return. So.
Yeah. The conversation we're having now is, I think it's great that we're having it, and I'm glad we're having it out in the open. But it seems to me like it's more like the beginning of a conversation rather than the end of it, you know, in the final month or two. So I'm certainly willing to keep on talking and listening and finding out what we can do and how we can work together. But this proposal, it's a limited upside for the school. And you know, as it's been said before, we've got some potential in which we may have to even close to double the capacity of Rick Marcotte Central School if, you know, if worse comes to worse. And another minor detail, because I like details, is if this were to come to fruition, what I would think would be, it might make sense to just put the parking lot where the athletic fields are and then put an athletic field where the parking lot is now. I mean, that's pretty far down the road, but why have this turn in and then turn left and go 100 feet towards that? That's just something that occurred to me. I think that's something for other people to work out those details. So I'd like to keep having the conversation, but I think right now I don't feel like I'm ready to give an answer. I'm sorry. And I appreciate that you guys have worked real hard on this. And these drawings, these look fantastic. I want to go visit this place. I really do. I want to take my kids there too.
I think, Tom, you have asked for sort of what other considerations. And, you know, as I've listened to the discussion, you know, some of the areas are really traffic flow. I think there's a concern about, you know, the parking and you know, does the school have to start policing parking in its employee and lot for parents and so forth? I think the issue of safety and security with the building and location, particularly with a multi-level facility that's overlooking playing fields, but also just the normal things that I think both our organizations think about. I think cost of improvements that would be necessary for the school to absorb, and the timing of those improvements. You know as well as we do that we have a limited construction window that usually is the summertime, usually July and August, and so there would be that issue. And then really what our requirement is to secure voter approval, either concurrent with an approval of funding for the project or in advance of that, and that would be something, these are really top of mind things that I'm thinking about that could impact the ability to move forward. So then the question is, you know, that's what I'm hearing in this first discussion in open session here. There may be other things that would come up, but does the time frame allow us to address those to get to an LOI in the time frame that you need, basically May? And that would be a concern I have. Is it's almost. Well, I mean, that's the question I have. Can we get to that point?
So, just to add,
Martin.
I mean, I do think it's premature to say yes or no on this. I wouldn't want to say no right now, but I'm not in a position to agree with it along the lines of what Bridget said. I think we should give it some more time and some more discussion to try to address some of these issues that we've now gotten on the table. So.
One thing I wanted to add to your list, Elizabeth, was along the lines of voter approval was some protection for the district if voters didn't approve either the funding for the library or, you know, obviously if they didn't approve the exchange of land, it stays with the district, but just something that addresses what would happen if the project for some reason didn't come to fruition.
Can I make a recommendation that the sense I'm getting from this discussion is the board doesn't have enough information to definitively say yes or no. I think there's some interest there. We're very concerned about the time frame you're on, but I'm wondering if there's an opportunity to get a subcommittee of the board and the council with our leadership to work through these issues that could lead to an LOI. And if that can happen in the time frame that meets the city's objectives, that would be great. If not, then I don't see an alternative but to take a pass at this point in time. But I would certainly be happy to serve on that subcommittee to accelerate responding to some of these concerns, or at least getting them out on the table and figuring out how they can be responded to in a time frame that meets the city's objectives and allays some of the concerns that the school district's bringing up.
Appreciate that, and we'll take that back to the council and to staff and kind of see what we can do. I'm not sure that, it sounds like a November vote for us right now is not going to be possible without an agreement here, and I don't know what that really means for the city right now, but that's important. That was important for us to find out tonight, and I thank you for that. I know you've given us much more time than we had allotted, and I appreciate that. I think it's all been good discussion and good feedback, and we'll continue to have dialogue, at least through Helen and Kevin with the both of you, to keep you apprised as to where we're at on this.
Yeah, one thing that we didn't talk about much tonight was the offer of exchange of the City Hall property where it currently is. And what I've run into is that I don't know much about the property. You know, we have some interest in moving some of our office space out of what is basically retrofitted classrooms in the Tuttle School right here, but we don't know, or I don't know, if the building where City Hall is right now would be adequate or 5 times bigger than what we actually need. So I don't know if it would be a useful exchange for the school district.
And Alex, the elements of that consideration were included in the memorandum of understanding back in August. So, and there wasn't information known, but it was really, in order to move the priorities forward the city had at that time, there was an effort to at least offer some first right of refusal.
Yeah.
That was at least buy, rent, whatever it might be, and there was some due diligence that would have been involved in that.
Yeah.
So.
Yep.
Okay.
So I'll give you a call tomorrow, Tom, and see if we can get something scheduled pretty quick for a subcommittee group.
Yeah, we'll need time to regroup.
Understand.
Too, David. May not have an answer for you tomorrow, but we know that Elizabeth's interested in a subcommittee, and maybe we can pursue that as an option if this is something we can continue to move forward.
Yeah, and I think the board would certainly be open to other options to try to address that time frame, but given what you've asked for tonight, I think this is sort of a summary that doesn't allow us to take specific action on the existing LOI. I think you've heard the concerns, and then the question becomes, can we bring the right resources to bear, along with all other priorities, to kind of fill in those blanks, to be able to move forward.
Same things we'll be looking at for the site and the property.
Yeah. Yes, sorry, Patrick.
That's okay. I'm also on the library board. So I just want to be clear, are you proposing a subcommittee that would meet relatively quickly with somebody at the city council
Sounds
to
like they
see
have to,
if
yeah.
a letter of intent could be formed? Is that what I'm hearing you say?
That's what I am proposing,
Know what the
yes.
board is
Yeah,
in
I mean,
agreement
we
with?
can't take action on it because
No,
it's
I'm
not.
just trying to, and I think that there was a question of intent, and that Tom had suggested.
And that's, I
So
think
what I'm
Tom's,
hearing is that
yeah,
there is
Tom
a
has asked about
possibility.
intent, and I think there's enough, concerns that the current LOI is not sufficient, and that would need to be addressed to get to an LOI, and at least it would address a tight time frame that would get us to a yay or nay with a valiant effort.
Thank you.
So we'll take that back to council and if, probably a step for you, if you could take action tonight, if we did have this subcommittee, who would be the contact folks that would serve from the school district side, so that you wouldn't need a subsequent meeting to do that appointment?
Yeah.
That might save us a couple weeks worth of time.
Yeah, we don't take action, we basically look for volunteers, so I've already volunteered. Do we have another volunteer to serve on a board subcommittee?
Depends on timing. I mean, depends on what day it is, so I'm not sure I'm the most reliable person to get things Tuesday
Yeah.
through Friday.
Yeah, I'm willing to do it, but I do have time limitations. Certain times that I can't do it, but I'm willing to work that out.
So I'll take that back to Helen and see, be in touch with David here. Again, thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right, we'll move on to, we're a little over time. We'll move on to agenda item 8, the superintendent's report.
So, thank you, Elizabeth. Next is under the superintendent's report is an update on our resilient school work, and I want to give Joanne Godak, our Director of Student Support Service, the opportunity to kind of introduce this and also welcome our guest, Joelle Van Lent. So, Joanne. Yeah, I don't want you to stand if you shouldn't stand, though. Why don't you guys come on up here, actually, it'd be easier. So Joanne.
Oh, do you need, actually, I'll get coffee.
So I think I was here a couple of board meetings ago, maybe?
Well, time flies, you know.
I know. Pre-surgery. I had knee surgery. No, puppy. And I had talked with you a little bit about the ACEs study and a little bit about adverse childhood experiences and a little bit about the work that we're doing in the school district. And Dr. Joelle Van Lent is an expert in trauma, and she works closely with the school district this year around helping us to develop an action plan and doing some training with our teachers. She has a very high-level understanding of what stress looks like and sort of what we're doing. So we invited her tonight because you guys had more questions than I could really answer. So we gave 2 handouts to everyone, and we're also putting them up on the screen. One is around what stress looks like, and I'm going to let you speak to this a little bit, Joelle, because we all experience stress, but some is good, some is tolerable, and some is not so good. So I'll let you talk a little bit about that.
And just to give you a little bit of context, that this whole concept of trauma-informed schools and creating opportunities to foster students' resilience, that's a nationwide effort in lots of areas, certainly in schools, and many or most of the schools in Vermont are engaged in this effort. So I'm part of a pilot project with the Agency of Education in the state of Vermont to look at this. So it really is, kind of South Burlington's effort to be part of a bigger picture, and happy to be part of that. So the concept here in terms of looking at positive stress, tolerable stress, and toxic stress is important because that's really kind of the crux of resilience. So what we want our students to really have the opportunity to benefit from adults is that positive stress is good and it's part of life. Positive stress is how we actually build resilience. And that would be for our students like when they go from preschool to kindergarten, when they go from one of the elementary schools to the middle school to high school, they try out for a play, they try out for a sports team, they ask somebody to come over to their house and play with them. all of these kinds of normal day-to-day things that do create stress, whether students succeed or fail, it fosters resilience, especially if the adults that are supporting them offer really good opportunities to teach them how to cope with these kinds of stressors. So even if students, let's say they try out for a sports team and they get cut and they're not on that team, that's actually a resilience building opportunity, and it's positive stress. And all of the skills that students learn when they face positive stress help them with more bigger deal kinds of stress. So we're not really looking at, I guess we're just looking at positive stress as opportunities. And then tolerable stress is kind of bigger deal stuff. Tolerable stress is like the death of a loved one, a house fire, a car accident, something that we certainly never want to happen, but is part of life. And what the research shows is that tolerable stress is not necessarily something that creates long-term damaging impact if people have good coping skills and good social support. And the resilience skills that you learn with positive stress help you with bigger deal kinds of tolerable stress. Toxic stress is more significant, and that's like living in a home with a family member that is substance addicted, chronic homelessness, food insecurity, living in a home with domestic violence. Those kinds of stressors impact 100% of people that endure them, but they don't necessarily impact people in a way that results in damage. So the phrase that we use for toxic stress is forever impacted, not necessarily forever damaged. So what we're thinking about with the students in our community and the adults is that all of our students face positive stress, and some of them, many of them, are going to at some point face tolerable stress. There's a minority or portion of the students that face toxic stress. If we have a sort of a resilient school, what that means is we're looking at what the research shows to be the essential protective factors for tolerable and toxic stress, and those efforts to kind of create stronger resilience skills in all of the students. It benefits 100% of the students, but it's essential to the members of the community that are facing toxic stress. It's their sort of opportunity to go from forever impacted to forever damaged. Hopefully that makes sense. Yeah,
makes sense. And when I was here last time, we spoke about the things that we're doing to react to our kids who are experiencing the toxic stress, and then the work that we're doing to be more proactive. So the other handout that you have today is around the action plan for establishing a trauma-informed school district. So we're going through these phases, and we're at different stages of implementation in each of our schools around this, really starting with increasing awareness and then building expertise. And then we'll be connecting to the community, and then we'll be designing a maintenance plan with the work that we're doing. So this is some of the work. We have a resilient school team, which Joelle and I chair, and we have representation from all of the school buildings, and we've really been working through what we need to do to build this South Burlington School District to be a resilient school district. And we're working through each of these phases, and a lot of administrators are here tonight, so they know that each of their buildings, they're doing a portion of this depending on what the needs are for the faculty and the students in their building. And we'll be moving through this and maintaining it over time so that we can have that proactive way of dealing with all the students that come to us. I don't know if you have questions about this action plan that we're looking at. And we are designing it for the school, particularly for South Burlington, and David will be approving that in terms of how we'll move forward and funding Joelle coming with us and all those pieces that happen with building that system. Questions, Martin?
I hate to ask this, but I always have to ask.
That's okay.
So are there metrics that we have that you're following to show, I hate to put it in this terminology, but I will, the return on our investment in trying to take these steps?
Yes,
Yeah.
the metrics that in our continuous improvement plan, are they looking at that tonight?
Yes,
So in the continuous improvement plan, it's identified as one of our strategies is around building social emotional skills, but two big things we're looking at. One is really, we've done a whole survey around the factors that build a resilient school, so we surveyed the whole school community to see what our baseline is on, do you understand this? Do we have this in place? All of the factors that need to be in place. So we have a baseline data on that, and then we'll be redoing that survey over time to see if we have the factors in place. So that's sort of the the structure. The other metrics that we're looking at is our discipline data and our Swiss data that we have for students. So how many office referrals we have, how many restraint seclusions are we doing, what times of day do those happen, and how many repeat offenders that we have. And we want to see those factors going down. And then we'll have our academic outcomes and the data that we do for our ends as far as our children meeting those ends, building their resiliency, and I don't know all the metrics that you have in that, but all those pieces as well. We'll be using that. So not only decreasing the negative outcomes, but increasing the positive outcomes for kids, and then making sure that all those pieces are in place that we know make a resilient school. So those are the metrics we're using.
There's a couple articles that were sent to you, and that's research done, with the Center on the Developing Child in Harvard. And what that research shows, it's important to think about that, because this isn't just for that minority group of kids. It really is for 100% of them. And what the research shows is that even the kids we have kids who are high flyers, kids who are doing just fine, and then kids who are really vulnerable and struggling. And if you do explicit, intentional effort to increase those resilience factors in all of the students universally, the research shows that even the high flyers do better, the kids that were doing just fine do better, and the kids that were really struggling have the opportunity to engage and develop and access education. So you really don't waste anybody's time. It clearly benefits everyone. And it's also important from a community standpoint. When you think about, let's say you have a kid who's doing just fine, and they're looking around at their community, they're watching how the community responds to things. If they see that community members who are more vulnerable are unconditionally accepted and supported, that makes that student who's even doing just fine feel less anxious, that their sense of belonging is unconditional, and they're actually able to function better and take positive risks and reach their potential. So when we really take a community sense of belonging and ownership over all of our community members, everybody notices that and everybody benefits that, from that, and that's what that research in those articles shows.
I know there's lots of studies that talk about, regression in learning over the summer, for instance. But with the toxic stress, the school is one environment for kids. And how does that get, if that's not reinforced, and in fact it's explicitly maybe not reinforced outside the school system, how does the research, or what are your thoughts about?
Right. It's a great question, and so then that's what a lot of teachers ask is, if we work really hard to provide structure and support and connection in school, but all of that's, if you have a child who's still living in toxic stress today and they go home to that every day and they're with that all weekend in summer, can we really make a difference? And the research shows absolutely schools can make a difference. So when you look at those resilience factors, one of them is a strong support person, which interestingly doesn't have to be a family member or somebody that they know for a long time. It can be your first grade teacher, your coach, your theater director, even for 1 or 2 years. And that predictable routine that kids have at school, even though it's 5 days a week and only part of the year, does make a difference in terms of the impact on their physical health and their development. So it buffers the impact of toxic stress and promotes their resilience.
And how does that, I'm just thinking out loud here, responding to that, how does that responsibility affect the stress for staff and those adults that are taking on that role?
Right, and so part of the, there's components of the training. Part of that is something that we call compassion satisfaction, because when you're working with students, community members, anybody in a helping profession that works with people who are the direct victims of trauma can have what we call vicarious trauma or compassion fatigue. So part of being a resilient school is not just addressing the resilience of the students, but also addressing the resilience of the staff, the faculty, and the administrators. So if you're working on everyone's resilience, that's what we have control over, is how we cope with all of this. Unfortunately, we don't have control over whether or not there's toxic stress in our community, or at least to the degree that we'd like, but we can buffer the impact of it on adults and children. And that, you know, sort of the reality that we're facing in all of our communities is that the number of community members facing toxic stress is increasing. So we need to be able to match that with, you know, thoughtful efforts.
Other board questions?
I'd like to just understand how, you know, this is a higher level, and that's what I know as a board member we're only supposed to look at. But it would be nice to really understand how this is working in the school. And you don't necessarily have to explain it now, but I'm wondering if, I mean, do you have weekly meetings, or is there something that I could just sit in and watch what you're telling the teachers? I promise I won't say that you're doing anything right or wrong, but just for informational purposes, because this is, I have a broader interest in this than just a board member. But
we're doing a series of trainings, and as far as I'm concerned, you're welcome to come. Anybody on the board is welcome to come to those. And there's monthly meetings of the Resilience district team, and then there's trainings which are right now happening at the elementary level. The hope next year is to carry that forward to the middle and high school level. So those in-service trainings would be a great opportunity to see that.
Yes. Exactly what they're using their time for, right?
Yeah.
I'll see if David will give me permission to attend one of those. Thank you.
Yeah, question more or less for Joanne. You've been doing a great job talking about trauma and trauma-affected students.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sort of like this is a slightly different rubric than the trauma-affected students that you talk about, but would the trauma-affected students be those fall entirely under those that are experiencing toxic stress, or how would it be? Well, can you compare the two or contrast?
Yeah, so trauma is a term that where toxic stress is sort of synonymous with kids who are experiencing trauma. Yes.
Okay. Because sometimes I've come away from your meetings and thinking, wow, I have to raise my voice to my kids sometimes.
It's probably positive stress.
Okay, positive stress.
That's right here,
That's why
Alex.
this is helpful.
Okay, thank you. Well, I was getting really concerned for my own kids' sake.
Well, and also, like, one thing to point out with that is that, so when you say tolerable stress and toxic stress, that's an experience. Trauma is the response to an experience. So somebody could develop post-traumatic stress disorder from tolerable stress if they don't have good coping skills and social support.
Right.
And somebody can experience toxic stress and be impacted but not have a long-lasting trauma response if they're resilient, and part of that is having those skills and that support. And the school is just an incredible opportunity to foster resilience so that the level of trauma or the potential for trauma is decreased. And how I like to think about it is that the more we learn about toxic stress and tolerable stress and resilience, the better we are at outsmarting trauma. So we're basically preventing trauma.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Any questions from the public?
I'm really happy that you're doing this. And one question came up about, the impact to staff, and I have read up about this. It's great stuff, but Joanne was pointing out that one of the metrics is what's the, behavioral issues that you have in class, and if you see that go down, well, as that goes down, that's a benefit to your teachers because they don't have to deal with that and they can teach. So, it's a big benefit to your teachers in that respect if it works out like that.
The hope by looking at sort of existing data is that school attendance, on-time school arrival, school attendance improves, truancy decreases, academic performance improves, discipline reduces, nurse visits reduces. All of those things should be shifting, and that's what the research shows happens when you do this effort.
And another comment, I'm trying to jump in, but I heard some data that 25% of the students at Yale suffer from stress. So this is your highest performers, which that's the kids that come out of South Burlington too, a lot of them. So you're not addressing, it's addressing everybody, as you pointed out.
Okay,
We'll let you know how it goes. We'll let you know our metrics, Martin, as we move along, okay?
Thank you.
I hope you're recovered.
for your
for-
time.
Thank you, Joelle.
You're welcome. Yes, thank you.
All right, well,
Wondering if we could
oh.
maybe, I know I have some administrators here just in case there's questions from the board on the calendar.
Okay.
And then just talk to Patrick Leo to move those.
I'm going to make a quick adjustment to accommodate some folks who sat longer than we should have on this meeting so far. We're going to hold David's report on the safety and security community meeting update, and then we'll shift agenda item 9 in order to discuss the school calendar right now, because it sounds like we have several administrators here who might be able to respond to questions or concerns.
I think we should put Patrick Leduc's last. Just like for old time sake.
You can walk out. Yeah, right.
All right, so we will move to agenda item 10, the school district calendar for 2018-19.
So I'll just start briefly. The board had questions from the last meeting, and I think a lot of that was around, some historical agreements and what have we done in this current year, and making sure that we were consistent with that agreement. And so we worked to provide some information to you. I'm not, again, wanting to seek out questions if you don't have them, but we tried to provide you with a little bit of kind of topical information specific to the calendar, the reasons that we added the days, some specifics to the professional development. You heard a piece of that again tonight from Joelle and Joanne, but again, I don't specifically know what additional questions you have, and I think this is an important component for us to get it so that community members, parents, and guardians can make decisions around things that relate to the calendar. So I don't know. And Stuart, anything else that you wanted to add?
I just want to reiterate, because some of the questions was whether there were more days. There are no more days, no more hours than last year. There is, it appears if you looked at February and May that it might be because we decoupled the early release day to the 2 late start days at the high school. It's just a busing issue at that time. So there's no change in time. And again, pointed out as with less of the missed March days, because it's always going to be that first Tuesday in March before students get back. We moved it out of June into March because June is just, we're going to do it this year, but we realize that is just not a very good time. If you have Joelle for the last session on June the 9th, it's probably not the best use, not to mention the science and or the other. And I did ask the other administrators here because we've been building professional learning based on what we thought last year when we said till 2020 with proficiency that this is the way we were going. And so, that's what our plans are based on.
Thanks, Stuart.
I still think the March 29th date is a problem. I really do. I mean, you can say that there are fewer days in March itself, but you still have break. And then the very next week, so you have 3 days of school, and the very next week you have the Friday off. Then you do have 1 full week of school, but then the very next week, another early release date. I really think that 29th, I was uncomfortable last summer when we talked about all the extra professional development. I understand the need for it. I didn't like the impact on the calendar. I'm not going back on that, but I really think that March 29th date needs to be moved somewhere else in the calendar. It's just too much, because then the first 2 weeks of April, again, 2 early release days that first week of April, and then the 12th, another early release day. There are just very few full weeks of school for parents and children to get into a routine and into a structure without having to juggle.
So, Bridget, we just need the time, so we could move it somewhere else in the calendar. I just am concerned because really, if you look at the calendar at any time, whether it's October, November, December, January, all those times have missed days, whether it's, the New Year and Martin Luther King Day, but we certainly could look to see where it would have the least impact
in terms of, you know, how many continuous school days we have, and move it out of March. We certainly have done that with, you know, the late start days. We only have one in some months because of trying to make the calendar not be impacted in that way. So we could just look to see where we could put it.
Question. Bridget, do you have any, I mean, certainly having continuous 5-day weeks is nice. So if we wanted to move it, could we move it back 3 weeks to March 8th?
I don't think the board is going to get involved in that
No?
level of detail. I think it's just expressing the concern about, that we're hearing from the community around contiguous weeks.
My hope is you would approve the calendar with the caveat that we'll move that date.
I would be willing to go that far myself. I can't speak for everyone else. That date is just really a struggle, because that's a very, very long break for parents, speaking as one. And then to just have so much, it feels like disruption to an elementary school child to have, you know, oh, what is the schedule today, Mom? It's not consistent, and it would be nice to have a couple of consistent weeks of school before we have another, in their mind, break, you know, on those Thursday and Friday parent-teacher conferences.
And some of the additional feedback the board's received since we had this discussion at our last meeting was also around that maybe schools out isn't quite as accessible as we think it is, and that there is an added expense to that that may or may not be prohibitive to some families. So I would just also add, are we making sure that we're letting people know who have conflicts from a work standpoint about that resource, and is it as accessible as we've communicated it should be?
We can certainly work on it.
Anything else? Any questions or comments from the public? All right, this is warned for action. Do I have a motion to approve the district calendar with the intent to reevaluate the March 29th date and then reinforce the alternatives for childcare on those days?
So moved. Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, motion passes. Thanks for the hard work on this one. Do you want to go back to safety and security?
I can do that quick while Pat does that. So I think Elizabeth and I, with the two of the school board reps, have talked briefly about putting together a panel, a safety and security panel. It's not the right wording. I'm currently in conversation with Rob Evans, who is the Vermont School Safety Liaison, and hope that he'll work with us to facilitate or moderate or be a part of that panel. So I've got some ideas currently. I think it's important. Elizabeth and I want to make sure people were informed. We're not exactly sure where that would be. We would like it to be relatively soon, since it's on the minds of a lot of people, and allow the community to come and do that. Essex is in the process of doing it as well, and so, you know, we'll piggyback on some of the work that they've done. Rob Evans was at that one and has some good information, and also some good feedback around things that maybe could be, you know, that we could do. So that's really what I have. I think it's important. We've obviously been doing a lot on the schools around safety and security upgrades. Some of that would be folded into this work, although we don't want to be telling everybody all of the tools and all of the things that we're doing in our buildings. So I don't know if the board has any questions specific to our desired community meeting.
So you said we'd get Rob Evans to be part of that, or?
Yeah, so no, Rob, I've been in contact with Rob. He's, again, I got an email from him. He's very excited and happy to do it. I haven't promised a specific format because Elizabeth, Alex, and Arnell need to come back into the fold, and we'll plan that out, I think, together. But I think we have the right idea, and also to allow the public to weigh in on some questions and get some of their ideas out.
And the article that will be in tomorrow's other paper is kind of an update on safety and security with a little bit of a tickler that there will be some kind of a panel available to the community in terms of sharing kind of recent thinking and be an opportunity to have a dialogue there.
Great.
Okay. All right. We'll move on. We'll move back to agenda item 9, the VSAC Career and Education Wellness Program. And we have an honored guest, Patrick LeDuc.
Honored. Wow.
Yeah.
Nice to see you all. Patrick LeDuc, South Burlington. I'm really presenting to you tonight in my official capacity as a Vice President over at Vermont Student Assistance. And I talked to Elizabeth a little while back about possibly coming in and sharing with all of you what we're doing in various communities across the state in a new way to help service both students and adults. So the packet that's going around, there's some extra copies if anybody else wants them, and I have some other materials I'll leave behind. So I'm going to do my best to make this really quick because you guys are, as I well know, got a lot on your plate, so I'll be respectful of that. So as you know, VSAC has been doing work around the state for about 52, 53 years now. We have counselors that work across the state, working in the high schools and middle schools, and most of the high schools and middle schools in the state, and also working with adults in Department of Labor offices, libraries, other places where adults can be helped. And all of that work is really in the area of kind of helping them to find their aspirations, helping them to figure out how to navigate the education space that they happen to be in at the moment. A lot of effort in post-secondary education, how to navigate that cycle, how to get into those places. And we've been doing that work largely through federal grants that we apply for every 5 to 7 years, depending how those things play out. And we've been doing good work in that regard and having really promising outcomes in a lot of cases. One of the programs that we introduced a handful of years ago was called a GUIDE program, and that's when we take the students that we work with in high school, which are primarily low-income and first-generation kids that we work with, and we actually continue to counsel them through the first 3 semesters of their college experience. And we've seen really nice numbers about their final graduation rates, at a much higher rate than most of the other students that are in some of the colleges. So we're really happy about that work as well. One of the challenges that we all have is some of the same challenges that most high schools have. Not as bad as middle schools and not as bad as elementary schools, but as you get to the high school, it's much harder to engage parents sometimes, whether you have an evening event or an event during the day, parent-teacher conferences. Life gets busy. It's hard to get a hold of parents. So what we've done is we've taken all of the work that we do in servicing students and parents across the state, and we've repackaged it into a different set of deliverables. And it's still one-on-one counseling in some forms and workshops, but what we are doing now is working with businesses to bring that counseling right into the business. So if you can imagine yourself as a parent of a high school student or even a middle school student, you'd love to help them more about understanding what are personalized learning plans, what is proficiency-based graduation, what is all this flexible pathways stuff, what should I be doing to prepare for post-secondary education. It's a lot to figure out, and it's not very much of it is the same as it was when they went to school. So we've found that a lot of these workshops, we find out people, they had these aha moments. They didn't know what they didn't know, and so they didn't know that they should have been concerned that they weren't taking advantage of this or that or the other thing. So we've got about 1,000 to 1,500 employees now that are covered across the state of Vermont. They're partnerships with businesses where we'll come in and do workshops, everything ranging from pre-K preparation, how to make sure that you're on track, all the way through navigating middle school and high school, all the stuff I just mentioned that are changing in our education space, navigating the post-secondary education space, and also working with businesses so that if they have staff in their own place or that individual wants to learn and go back to school or never went to college and want to get that degree so they can move up the chain in their organization or some other organization, we can provide those services as well. So there's a lot of information in this little PowerPoint, and I'm happy to answer any questions, but that's really the highlight of it. There's a chart toward the back of this. Whoops. It didn't print in my copy, but maybe I got a bad copy. But the value proposition to the businesses to partner with VSAC is really as a retention tool, as a tool to attract employers with this new innovative benefit, and as a way to really be part of the education solution in a way that they can manage. So they have resources that are coming in that are helping their employees be less stressful because they understand what's happening in the education space, and then they pass it on to their kids. And the real big dream there for me is if
if I'm talking to a parent or one of our counselors is in that workplace, and then somebody at the high school is talking about something similar, maybe around the dinner table that night, there's this conversation that starts happening that wouldn't have happened before possibly. So we're really excited about this, and we're rolling that out. And so we have one client in the Chittenden County area. So that's the dynamic here that gets a little bit challenging. They're not tied to any particular school, right? Because they could work in one town and live somewhere else. So we are really high level in the particulars when we talk about PLPs and PBGRs because there is a little uniqueness school by school, and then we connect with that. And the other thing I'll mention, since I realize Steve's sitting here, is we are starting to grow partnerships with other publics and nonprofits in the state. So one of the programs that we are aware of at VSAC, but we are not the expert in, is the prior learning assessment, which the state colleges offer, which is where an adult can go back, take one course, document their life learning, and get a number of credits for that one course. It's a real great kickstart to get someone on that degree path. They're in our newest catalog that we haven't printed yet. And if somebody wants that workshop, we call the Vermont State College System, and they bring someone in to do that workshop. So our goal is to continue to expand this so it becomes a really, really valuable benefit for the employers and the employees. So some of this is happening a little bit in your backyard, so I thought it'd be great for you guys to know what's going on. Any questions I can answer for you? And that was less than 15 minutes.
Is there an ask for the district?
Not at all.
This?
No, this is an awareness.
And just out of curiosity, I was thinking this might be something of interest to the South Burlington Business Association.
Yes.
I don't know if you've had that opportunity.
We've had a little bit of a conversation about presenting that.
Great.
Yes.
So a business just looks at the catalog and says, I want to have you do these I mean, how does it work with the business?
So we'd sit down with them, I do a little bit slower presentation about what their offering is. And we would talk about it, and we would say, okay, so how many employees do you have? What are your concerns? What would you like to accomplish with this? And then we make it a little bit unique to the employer in question. If they're a really small employer, it's a little harder to do it because of the economics of the whole thing, but we'll partner with 3 or 4 small businesses and so let's do this together.
Okay.
But
so there's some fee, obviously, the businesses pay for it.
Yeah,
to
we
cover
ask
the costs and
them to
such.
basically cover our costs
right,
to do
great.
it. That's really all it is.
Okay.
Yep.
Great.
So we have one where we'll do workshops during their lunch hour, and then in the afternoon, our counselor's there to take half-hour one-on-one sessions, and so people can bring in their individual questions about certain situation. We've had people that have been eligible for public service loan forgiveness that didn't know it. And so that's a huge win to get that person that information.
Have you done, specifically with schools, employees of school, in schools,
No.
after hours working, I think about elementary or
Yeah.
middle level parents. Obviously, high school, once they get dialed in, they're getting a lot of that information. But are you guys doing any of this with,
Like the employees of schools?
employees of schools?
Yeah, we haven't yet, but, we're open to anybody that would like, we're a nonprofit trying to serve as many Vermonters as we can. So anybody that's interested in this, we would talk about it. We rolled this out about 18 months ago, so we've been a little quiet about it for about a year because we wanted to get it right and make sure we were doing it right. And we learned a lot in that first 12 months about this method of delivering the knowledge. So I think now we're starting to open up the doors a little bit, see who would like to kind of step in next.
Any other questions? A bit of an unrelated question, Patrick,
Sure.
because we talked about it when we met, but what's the status of the education portability?
Legislation?
Yeah, great
Yes.
question. So the portability of Vermont state grants was on a discussion in both the House and Senate this year. My understanding of it right now is it's not on the table. It could come back on the floor potentially, but right now it's not something that's being considered in either of the House or the Senate Education Committees actively.
Great, thanks for the update.
Thank you.
All right?
Great, thank you. Good seeing you.
You want to hear about the golf?
All right, we'll move on to agenda item 11, the district continuous improvement plan, and this is warned for action.
Yes, it is. So it's in your packet. Again, or Stuart can walk you through it. This is a important component for us as we continue to move forward the district. So I don't know if any of you have I don't know what your pleasure would be, Elizabeth. Do you want a quick overview from Stuart, highlighting some of that, I think might be helpful?
I think an overview would be
Yeah.
helpful, yes.
Yeah, I think an overview for a variety of things. I need to also put it in a context. So we've been doing action plans that changed to continuous improvement plans for several years, but the state, under their new EQS, under the EQS, which asks for continuous improvement plans, and under their, so the educational quality standards, I don't want to try to sit here and throw initials at you, even though it's very tempting, that under the educational All Students, Every Student Succeeds Act, in the state plan, it said that every district, we've never had to do a district plan before, as well as every school will have a continuous improvement plan. So this is our first district-wide continuous improvement plan. This continuous improvement plan, which I've already uploaded pending board's approval, that is warned for action on April 5th, because they wanted them by March 30th for the district level, in the new software for the state, is one of the things they look at when we get grant money, Title I, Title II, Title III, and Title IV, which is Title I is for poverty, Title II for professional development, Title III is English language learning, and Title IV is wellness and technology. So these components are the headings based on what the EQS says we need to be focusing on, and those are proficiency, those are personalization, those are the MTSS, and social emotional learning. And so those are the main topics that we've addressed both at the district level, and this is the district one that's coming to you tonight. Hopefully by the next board meeting, there's only one school that's still working on theirs. You will see the other 5 district or school-wide, the high school, through the 3 elementary schools. And those are a little more specific. You know, this is more generalized because it's about everybody, K-12, but if you go to Chamberlain's, you know, it's more specific about what the tasks are they're going to do. But they include our coaching, they include important components like the extended school year we do in the summer, because all those things are funded by those grants, and so we have to say these are things that we think are important. So you also didn't get with your packet, but you should have gotten tonight, the list of the people who actually did this. This isn't a creation of myself in a dark room. We had a committee. We've been meeting since January pretty regularly to go over these pieces, to look at the data that are referenced. If you went to our, you can see by the printout that there are live links. They include, you know, our SBAC data. They include a amalgamation. We do an MTS evaluation of our schools every year that we've been doing in 4 of our 5 schools since 2014, and we have all that data, and that we put together, you know, kind of like the district data, but, you know, each school again has their own data, and those things informed the work we did here. So again, the format was pretty much determined by the state, you know, that you needed to have a shared vision, a needs assessment, you needed to look at problems of practice and to go deep, and then to come up with the goals that we have for the coming year. So I think that's enough an overview.
And this group has met, you know, not obviously just once.
Oh,
it's
no,
met
no,
a series of, yeah.
we've met pretty much every 3 weeks since January, with our last meeting being the 21st of March, I think it was. And also it's in each of the schools, they have committees as well. This is just for this particular district-wide plan.
Last thing, Stuart, just regarding the deadline, just so you know, I mean, this, as we continue to work to be compliant, this was something that came quickly that we did respond back to and saying, you know, this is a pretty quick turnaround time around getting approval and having to post it up district-wide, so.
Yeah, I mean, we had to submit already, like I said, pending approval. There are districts that have said,
we haven't done
you know,
this.
we're not going to approve it quite yet. We have a whole process that, you know, we go through, whatever. My hope is that you have enough information here to approve it so we can move forward and then go with the school-wide ones. This is new for us, and it's new for the state, and I had to enter it into the software. David can tell you that was, and I don't want to make an editorial comment on what level of support we got from the state. That was probably enough of one.
What was the time frame to generate?
Well, we've known about this, but they started in December with a series that we signed up 6 people to go to, that they canceled after the first one. And they actually posted how to put stuff in during February vacation. That was the first time when we got all the components in one place.
So if I can clarify, this is a requirement for title funding. It's new to us, new to the state, and
Well, we've always had to have some measurement.
Always had to have some kind of action plan.
Right.
A district-wide one is new to us.
The district is new.
We've always had school ones.
And that will be new
last
to any
year-
district? What about SUs?
SUs, well, it depended. Under No Child Left Behind, if your SU was underperforming in a way our SU never was, they had to have district ones.
Okay.
So there were districts and SUs that had to have a district-wide but we were never required because our SU performed above that level.
Right.
That's one. 2, just to be clear, last year for the first time, we had to put our continuous improvement plans in as an attachment to our old software because under the new ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, there has to be continuous improvement plans or action plans or something that relates to the federal grant. Before that, even though those components were there, we didn't actually have to show it to them. We just had to have it. So now it's actually embedded in the software. They have a new software package. And so theoretically, when we put in something in the grant, they can cross-reference and make sure it was part of our needs assessment, it was part of our continuous improvement plan.
So from an accountability standpoint, who will follow up on this?
We will, the state will.
We don't know what kind of level
Well,
is that.
So
but we
just to
need
be
stay
clear,
on
this
top.
is phase 1.
Yeah.
That's what's due on March 30th that we had to put in. There's a phase 2 and a phase 3, which are the evaluative parts of the plan. And so those will have to be done before the end. I'm assuming that somewhere around January or February of next year, we will need to have the second phases after we've implemented those things in the fall.
Is this a useful tool to the district?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, I think it is, and I think, the agency's going in the right direction around, getting this level of detail on certainly their title funds. The hope is, of course, they don't keep changing, and this is part of what happens, and/or come up with different software applications in which you have to spend an exorbitant amount of time figuring out how to input it in a way that's going to work. So,
I mean, we're supposed to get feedback from the state, which we've never gotten before, so that should be very helpful to us. Under Every Student Succeeds Act, the things that we have to have evidence that they're working, which we didn't have to have before. That's a national piece, which I think should be helpful for us, because that's the same question that Mark asked, are we getting our bang for a buck if we're doing this trauma work? Well, we have to show that we're getting our bang for a buck for whatever we're using. So I do think it will be helpful, just like anything that's new. And because timelines were accelerated, I think, compared to the information coming out, I would have loved to put this in front of you sooner. But also, it takes a while for a committee that size to agree, to come to the piece, especially when we're-
I mean, the agency is doing the very best they
Yep.
can. They have some staffing and some stressors going on. Obviously, Rebecca's no longer there. But, they have some stressors going on but yet still trying to make sure that people are adhering to the requirements that need to be. So we're responsive.
No, and again, like I said, this is the work we're doing anyway. I mean, we didn't invent stuff. I mean, the work around proficiency, personalization, this self-regulation, this is all continuing of work we've been doing in this district, but it does, put it in one place and also puts it in front of you, I think, in a coherent way, which I think is also helpful.
Other board questions or comments?
Very minor comment. I mean, if this is a document that also is useful for general public, I know in several places you explained what acronyms were, but on the last page, you didn't spell out what Swiss or PBIS is. I mean, if this is a document that we can be using just generally to show what we're doing.
I can do that.
Very minor, but I thought it was good.
Any other questions?
This is more of a, I don't know how to phrase it, high-level question for another night, but just to park it, what we mean by equitable. Because we talk about equitable, we've talked about it in master planning and visioning in many different ways. We talk about it in here in almost every sentence. What does it mean to provide an equitable education to everybody? And we've never, it just gets thrown around. And I don't think it's clear. And if we're just using, for the most part, SBAC scores to see if kids are getting to proficiency, we may be putting opportunities in front of kids, for example, and lots of opportunities and pouring resources into certain groups of kids and not enough in others in certain ways. But how are we going to figure out what we mean by equitable and what that means for our resource allocation and our curriculum design and our MTSS and all of that? I still feel like it just feels very vague to me as I look through documents like this and like the curriculum development that we'll talk about later. It's easy to say, and it sounds great, and it's what's in all the grants, I'm sure. You know, when you get, title funding and all that, of course, you want to be providing equitable education, but what does that mean? And if we don't understand what it means, how are we going to figure out whether we're providing it or not? Whether we're being
I think
fair.
that's a good question, Bridget, and I would love to do something around that question, certainly in terms of the pieces here and the pieces of data that, that we've brought in to do this work.
Yeah.
So I think when we bring back the school, some of the school-wide
right, because
plans,
they do speak
you'll
to
see
some more specific.
a good place to we work on putting that in.
Yeah.
Do I have a motion to approve the district continuous improvement plan with those modest
So moved.
Some acronym change.
acronym changes?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Great, thank you.
Approved, thank you.
That's a good question, now that we've done that. Should the board make any mention of thanks to these people? I see some of these people are parents, so they're volunteering their time. If we're not going to do that, I want to take a moment and say that I recognize some of these parents from Marcotte, and I'm impressed that they stepped up and offered their time for this.
No, that's great,
Yeah.
and we of course have thanked them, and they're not done, so.
Oh, good.
At least for a little while, they get a little rest, but.
Yeah.
And we'll make the non-Marcotte parents as well.
Oh, well, of course, yeah. I don't know if there's any in there, but
Alice,
yeah.
the people that are part of the various committees, including this one,
Yeah.
the board, I think, cares and appreciates that work. It's nice. Yeah.
I just want to do a quick agenda check here. Steve, are you okay, time-wise, if we need to move master planning and visioning up, I could do it now, if you need that?
Yeah, no, that's good. Thank you for asking. I think I'm covered.
Given the time, it's up to you, is that question of if you have, I don't know how long the audit takes.
I will try to do it quickly.
I just wonder if whether.
Well, let me come up, let's go, I think you should go ahead and get audit going, and maybe I'll scan the agenda for some things that.
Okay,
if you
so
wanna try to move.
why don't we start agenda item 12, and this is the school district audit for FY17.
I will try to do it quickly. I flagged some pages I thought I ought to mention, and there's way too many of them, but this report is getting bigger and bigger and bigger every year. And there's an enormous amount of information and data in here, and all I hope to do is give you a flavor for what I think the high points are, so that if you think you want to go back and look for more detail, at least you know that it's here and maybe where to find it. And the first thing in the audit is the auditor's letter, pages 1 through 3, and the important piece in that is on page 2. At the top of page 2 is the opinion. And this is what is called a clean opinion. It means that your financial reports meet the generally accepted accounting principles for school districts and public entities. I am gonna flip through here pretty quickly. The single biggest schedule now in today's modern audit is on page 8, the statement of net position. So page 8 shows everything that you own or are owed and everything you've spent and or owe. And at the bottom line there, a remarkable result, I think, for this year. Not always going to be this way. Your statement of net assets, your net position, increased by $1.1 million between last year and this year, $6.8 million at the end of 16, and $7.9 million at the end of 17. And nearly all of that, probably all of it, was the building improvement projects you engaged in and completed in the current year. So that's an enormous schedule. Page 17 was and still is the page that I try to show boards every time I try to go through the audit. And the operative numbers here for me are the general fund balance numbers. That's in the first column of numbers, general fund, your assets and your liabilities, and what you have left over at the end of the year. So the total fund balance at the end of 17 was $1,065,828. $553,435 of that was reserved to offset the 17-18 year tax levy. So that money has already been incorporated into your books in the current year, but that money was reserved from the 16-17 year for this purpose. The amount that is available for next year, FY19's tax levy reduction, is $509,513. That's a little bit less than what we said at budget time. They came up with some audit entries that reduced it since we had a conversation with them back in November. This is the final audited number, 501,513.
So that is for FY20 budget, is that right?
That's going to offset
2 years forward,
FY19 is what my understanding is.
We
I hope that's
we
right.
haven't approved FY19 budget right now, so
And-
it will offset that.
Right. The next page here, I look at is page 22. This is not just the general fund book. This is the entire school district, everything you spend or earn. And your special revenue funds are shown, your proprietary funds they're called now, on page 22. And the piece that I'm gratified to report, and I'm sure you can pat the food service folks on the back for, we started the year with a fund deficit in the food service fund of $264,699. That goes back many years, and every year we try to make inroads on it. This year it dropped to a fund deficit of $183,365. I think that's a terrific result for a one-year change. The Schools Out program continues to do well financially. It started the year with a fund balance of $275,000 and ended the year $373,000, a full nearly $100,000 increase in the Schools Out balance. The next column, Munson Field, we used about $62,000 during the 17 year to support the track and field project from Munson Field. So that one dropped from $84,000 to $11,176. That's your proprietary funds.
Can I just ask a question?
Sure.
Before you move on from this page, though. But you're looking at the very bottom, on page 22, you're looking at the very bottom net position.
Right.
But, for example, in school nutrition, there was a transfer in, and I'm assuming that's from the general fund,
Right.
of $60,000.
Right.
So I'm delighted that the operating income is positive. You know, that's a plus for us, but it's not quite so rosy. I mean, it's $21,000, which is great because it's in the black as opposed to in the red. And again, for Munson Field, we're actually, you know, doing pretty well there. If you look at the bottom line number, it looks like our net position went down, but that's partly because we transferred funds out of that account to shore up things in other places because we had a positive operating income. So I would be more focused on that operating income line in terms of how those, or maybe I'm reading that wrong, but that would be my understanding of how those different businesses, if you will, these little businesses within the school district are doing. Or am I reading that incorrectly? Because my understanding is that this transfers in would be 60,000 that we funded out of the general fund into school nutrition, and 81,223 that we funded into the Schools Out program.
Well, in the terms of school nutrition, I'll just say that running a school nutrition program is an extreme challenge in school districts. Many school districts subsidize their school nutrition funds by $100,000 or more dollars a year, every year, just to keep it afloat. In our case, I'm pleased that the operating income is positive at $21,334.
And I am too. I just want to be clear about just how positive things are.
And we are supporting it to try to erase the carried forward deficit, but I'm pleased with that. In terms of the Munson Field, this was a conscious decision by the board and the administration to use the Munson Field income to put improvements back into the Munson Field, so that there was $60,000 or there about 100 or something that was carried forward over several years, and it supported the resurfacing of the turf field and resurfacing of the track and the other improvements that were out there. That was a conscious decision to do that.
No, and I'm delighted by that. But what I'm saying is if you just look at the net position and the net position, then you're sort of ignoring kind of how the business is. You're adding in things, decisions that the board has made, or decisions that the administration has made about how to move money around within the district. If you look at the operating income, that shows you really how those things are doing. It's great. Munson Field is supporting itself. Schools Out program is supporting itself, and so is school nutrition. I just think the net position, although it's a net position, sort of muddles it up a little bit with things that we've decided to do as a board.
I wouldn't argue with you a bit, but I'm trying to kind of at least show the high points here anyway, and I'm pleased with this.
And Munson Field's going to look even better once we have those permanent bathrooms built,
Oh,
because everyone's going to come there,
It's going to be really sweet. Okay, the next piece that I'd like to show you is the page 25. The biggest growth industry in municipal auditing is the pension funds. Probably 40 pages here this year are a result of the pension funds that we operate or are part of. This one, I think, is the most favorable one. This is the internal one that you run yourselves, now closed to new entrants. But this started the year with $9,022,000, say, in the bank to fund future retirees' benefits, and ended the year at $10,283,000 in the bank to fund future retiree benefits. Along the way, paying off $490,000 worth of benefits to retirees. So that is a really good result, in my opinion. The next piece, sure.
What's that level of funding relative to the total liability?
I believe we're like 74% or something like that. I'm sure it shows in here. Somewhere in here, you'll find that number.
I didn't understand
And
the
I've read it
question,
at different times for different years, and I think it's in the mid-70s. Page 32 is a new item that I just want to flag for you. Page 32, note 1, the top of the page. We are now required, though there's no effort to kind of do anything more with this but disclose it. The value that the state retirement system, teachers' retirement system, pays to our retirees that we don't have to pay for. And the idea is that we're understating our costs, the GASB folks believe, because the state pays our retirement contribution for us. And they claim that this number is $2.4 million a year is the cost of the retirement system that the state pays on our behalf every year towards the retirement system. You might want to think that your salaries and benefits would be $2.5 million higher if the state didn't provide the retirement system benefit. So there's a big load of information in here about the state retirement system. That's the,
This is what the
that's the
state is
easiest one
saying
to
is the
understand.
annual cost of the current pension benefit.
The part that is attributable to our number of employees, yes.
Retired and currently working.
So
It's our
this would be
retired
both
employees,
active
too.
contributions?
I think it's the retired people.
Yeah, it may not even be the active people,
That-
because we are
that's-
starting to pay at least a portion of that. Well, it's
So
coming
this
out
is
of
the,
fund.
this is the cost of retirees across all employee groups
Right.
within South Burlington
Right.
right now.
I know that's been an issue for you in negotiations and all, Elizabeth, too.
Do you know how they calculate that, John? Sorry for asking that question, but, I mean, the arrival of that number.
I could give you 2 hours on that one subject. I'm
But
gonna try
do
not
we
to.
feel like it's
They-
a valid calculation, or?
Well, I would have said so, except I went to a session last week where Colchester's report was used as an example of how to do an audit report. And they had a 3-year layout of what that number had been. And the report was something like $900,000 in 2015.
This is what the state was paying on their behalf?
Something like $8 million in 2015, and something like $15 million in 2017. And I raised my hand and I said, this can't be right. It cannot be right that this thing went up by a factor of 15 in 3 years. And one of these speakers said, well, that's because they haven't agreed yet on how to compute this. The assumptions have changed every year, and they're very volatile. So I don't have any confidence at all in a lot of these numbers, but we're yet required to report them.
This is reported to our auditors by?
By the state retirement system. The state retirement system is required to do this calculation,
Now,
this
yeah.
series of calculations, and we simply insert them in our audit
Do
report.
the auditors have an opinion about the veracity of the data that's in
I
our
think they
audit?
specifically exempt themselves from weighing in. If you read this closely, you'll say they're not auditing the state's report. I'm almost positive that's in here. The other scary number is on page 48. Page 48 is another pension number, which I thought was worth highlighting. The proportionate share of the net pension liability associated with the district is $41.1 million. It's all state in this rendition, but that's the liability that the state carries on our behalf for teachers assumed to be in this system.
So can I go out on a limb and say we need to understand how these numbers are presented to our auditors?
It would be nice to have some kind of presentation on this. The auditor might be able to, I know the auditor would be delighted to come speak to this report. If that was a section, maybe he could bring in somebody that was expert in this and kind of describe how it comes together.
Yeah, honestly, I think I'd like to get someone from the state
That's possible.
to describe what is being supplied to the auditors.
And I guess, I mean, this is a benefit that the state has agreed to give to teachers.
No, this is all employees.
Well, all right, all employees, but no, my point only is on behalf of us, well, thank you very much for having negotiated whatever that benefit is, and then saying it's on behalf of us. I just put it in a different sense, that the state has decided, has negotiated, has figured out what the pension benefit is for teachers statewide, whether teachers have been here the whole time, have gone to another school district part-time, have been, in different places. The pension that's being provided is by the state. I know that it's being put in here. I mean, I would argue against that fact, since it's a state benefit, it's not a local benefit.
Well, the scarier part about that is in 2 years, I think, it's not only going to be in your audit report as a disclosure, it's going to be in your budget. because the state is gonna move that expense from its budget to yours.
They're moving the expense from the current teachers, not from the deficit. Not the deficit that's.
So I think that means is that $2 million number you saw first is the number that's gonna get added to your budget.
Also not necessarily so. Right now, the amount of money that they are for current teachers was put in the ed fund last year. It was about $8 million. And that's for all teachers, current teachers. That's how much they have to put in annually to cover their future pension benefit. And this year, it's a little less than that for some reason. Well, probably because of the market. So that's what's divvied up among the 30,000 teachers that we have in the state, and we have some portion of it, but that's not $2 million. That would be, a quarter of that, and we don't have a quarter of the teachers.
I'm over my head in that conversation, I'll readily admit. But this is an increasing concern of the powers that be.
So we can so note it and see if we can get some additional information around this yet.
Yeah, if we could get some
there's another report on page 66 that relates to the general fund budget and actual that I thought was worth highlighting for you. You frequently get comments, I think, or questions from folks as to, how your budget ended up. And this is a kind of an official budget result on page 66. And it shows the budget in the first two columns. So they consider an original and a final. If we were to do budget transfers, there would be slight differences among those accounts, but we generally don't do budget transfers. But the total lines, I think, are worth noting that we budgeted $46,436,000 for income, and we received $47,595,000, so that the revenue side was $1,158,000 over budget. We received $1 million more than we anticipated in revenue. And the expense side of the budget, we budgeted $45,768,000, and we expended $46,529,000 for an expense deficit of $761,000. On net, we gained $397,000 because our revenue increase was more than our expense increase. And nearly all of that $761,000 is related in some way to special education, out-of-district placement, or extra staffing expenses. There's more detail on this further in here, but this is a one-pager that you can quickly understand, I think. And in page 81, Stuart will really appreciate these pages. Page 81 starts a schedule of all the federal grant expenditures, and I'm not going to really say much about these except to highlight them for you. Page 81 talks about Title 2A, Project Search, Title 1A, Idea B preschool, and it goes on for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 pages of federal and state grant activity. We get a lot of money from the federal and state grants because we manage them well, and we look for ones wherever we can find them, and they're all accounted for and expended correctly. And I can prove that by showing you page 108. Page 108 is just about the last report. It is the last report, last page. And it's a summary of auditor's results. According to the federal grants, did the auditor have any concerns over how we manage federal grants? And every checkbox is checked off no, except the one that says, is the auditee qualified as a low-risk auditee? And yes, we are. And the final page I want to show you is page 103, which is backed up a couple of pages. They used to print this report separately from the audit report, but now they apparently are putting it in the body of the report. They're calling it a report on internal control over financial reporting. This is where if they had any concerns about how we do our bookkeeping, if there's some voids anywhere, if there's things that we should be concerned about. And this year, there's nothing. There's no significant weaknesses or significant deficiencies that they discovered while they were here for a week looking through our books. And I think that's a nice result to have. Usually they find something to complain about, but this year they didn't. So this firm is R.H.R. Smith. They're from Maine. They're over here a couple of times a year for one reason or another. We're going out to bid. The city's going out to bid for a new audit firm right now. You're supposed to rotate your auditors every few years. So they may not be the auditor next year. I hope they are. They do a good job for us. There's an enormous amount of work in here, and to put it together is huge.
Thanks, John.
Can I ask two small questions?
Sure.
One is just as I'm trying to read this and understand it myself, and this is going to seem small to everybody else, but I was trying to understand the financial statements. Deferred outflows of resources, deferred outflows related to
What page
pensions.
are you on?
I'm on page 14, and there are notes in the financial statements about it, but even after reading the notes, it was sort of the one thing that I just couldn't wrap my head around. So a deferred outflow of resources sounds to me like a liability. I'm confused about what this is and how it relates to pensions. And then there's a deferred inflow related to pensions. I'm just confused about what those are. Do you understand?
No, I'm not gonna be able to go very far with this, but
Okay.
there are accounts payables, and those are what we always knew was money we owed people at year end, and we had to pay within 90 days or 30 days or 60 days or something. But now they're trying to claim like the pension, they're trying to recognize pension expenses and bonded debt expenses on these reports. So they're bringing in deferred outflows, meaning we don't really need to recognize those, but we're going to recognize them. And we're also going to recognize the deferred inflow, meaning at some point in the future, somebody's going to have to come up with some money to pay for that bonded debt and to pay for that pension system fund. And we're going to put that on your audit report. To my mind, it's entirely speculative, completely speculative. The session last week, the guy tried to explain that this confuses people because this sheet has different revenues on it than the statement of activity sheet. And I, as a financial person, I can't explain that to a board. I don't understand it myself. But I think they've gone too far with this full disclosure thing. And that's about all I can tell you. Again, we could invite Ron to come up or Bill to come up and go through this with you. I'm sure they'd be delighted to do it.
Maybe one of the targeted
But
questions. that we
it's
can
over
ask.
my head, really. I'm sorry. It's a new schedule, a new form, and I understand they're gonna make this even worse in coming audits. They're gonna bring in more stuff. Good time to retire, I think.
And the last one is a small presentation question, because if I were a community member, I would probably focus on the stuff that was more accessible versus, the notes to financial statements and stuff. And I was just wondering who prepares the sort of more narrative sections of the audit. One that stood out for me, for example, is there was a statement that said that there were home removals in the Chamberlain neighborhood, and that was going to result in decreased enrollment for Chamberlain School, which hasn't actually turned out to be the case. And I was just concerned about, how things are presented in here and how much control we have over that versus how much is an auditor,
Nearly every word in this is written by the auditor. The exception is the biggest exception is the state pension funds section, where the state pension fund writes that whole section and gives it to us, and we have to include it verbatim. The other piece that some districts write, and I wrote this myself personally in Hanover, in the 4 entities in Hanover, it's the management discussion and analysis page that I think you're referring to, starting on page 4 to 7 or 8 probably. And in this entity, Ron writes this stuff, and he sends it to us and say, what do you think of it? So Amity and I went through this and we suggested some changes. So this is, I would say that we would take responsibility for the narrative in this section. And if you don't like it, you should complain to me and Amity maybe. But it's hard for us to come up with cogent words of wisdom for this section, but
Yeah,
we'll
I would just
try.
say, it sort of reads a little bit like the risk factors, for example, that you would have in a prospectus or something, which is fine, you know, we need to have those in there. I just want to make sure that we're totally accurate and not sort of going that next step in statements that, yes, you know, these are the things that are affecting the district, but the actual, how they're affecting them, we just have to be careful to make sure that it's matching up with, we may not know how those home removals are affecting us, for example. It's a small thing. I was just wondering how the process worked. And
Yeah, we're supposed to have kind of editorial control over that.
Okay.
We could be more careful next year. So that's, and again, we post this on our website. We have it on the website going back several years. And if any of you have questions about any of it, you know, I'll try to find answers for you if I don't know them. Okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. We're going to, David and I just kind of briefly conferred, we're going to take agenda item 15 off this agenda in the interest of time. And then it sounds like agenda item 14 is a quick wording change. So why don't we push forward with agenda item 13?
Yep.
Master planning and visioning?
So, I'll cover this, again, some of this was shared a little bit in the city communication around the LOI. But an update on the sound insulation at Chamberlain, there's two things going on. One is, we're gonna be doing our sound study this month, where we'll be seeking our own, through ATC, our own assessment on the noise level at Chamberlain. And then two, which is specific to this one, is the current status of sound insulation is that we are continuing to request that sound insulation process begin as soon as possible under the 2015 noise compatibility program. We have been corresponding with the FAA and with the Burlington International Airport, and we're hopeful for, you know, some resolution. And so we've gone back and forth with correspondence. Again, the airport management has been responsive, but yet, as I said earlier, we've not yet had any positive or affirmed yet action. So that's on the update on the sound insulation. Let me pause there for a second. Anybody have questions specific to that?
Well, just the note from the last meeting I attended, David, is it does seem that any of these remedies, and there were a bunch, sound insulation is one of 5 or 6 that are available, but they generally have releases associated with, like, okay, this is the remediation you get, now, you know, forever hold your peace. And what, you know, is happened in the process, and I don't know if we circulated those notes around, but basically FAA funding has been secured to create the new contour maps, NEM noise exposure maps, and those are going to be available, at least drafts, I think, by the fall, maybe sooner. And the key parameter, as I understood it, is you know, right now we're on that, in that 65 to 70 decibel line, which qualifies us for sound insulation, right? But if we're in the 75 line or greater, 75 and above, we actually qualify for purchase. And so what I'm wondering is, if we pursue the sound insulation now, and I have no expectation we're going to know by summer, you know, whether or not we're going to get it, does that preclude us pursuing purchase if in fact we fall in the 75 plus DNL line based on the new NEMs? So that, I mean, I just think that's kind of important before we sign on the, and I'm presuming that they'd have to come back to us with procedures and somewhere to sign before pursuing insulation. And I just think we should, you know, it's kind of critical to know that by pursuing insulation, we aren't taking purchase off of the table.
Well, again, I think, you know, due diligence on our behalf, I mean, there's no, obviously, we'd like to be provided with some option, you know,
Right.
sound insulation option, or what is going to be the next step. So again, this letter that just went out, actually this morning, back to the airport management, is really requesting, you know, a response to our request. if that is the way they're headed, we think, I mean, again, we think that it's important that we're in the queue for sound insulation.
Sure.
As, you know, being paramount right now, so that if they're telling us to wait for the new NEM, then the NEM doesn't happen until fall or later, then we're in a situation, or could be, where we're gonna be left with, you know, a situation that could be untenable to students. That said, if what does come, that we're gonna get sound insulation and all, at the same time, acquisition is an option, then hopefully that will also factor into our master planning work as well.
All right.
know?
I guess I just wanted to make sure
Yeah.
that I was clear is, I don't think they're telling us to wait.
Yeah.
I'm saying if we proceed with one remedy,
Mhm.
and part of the
Yeah.
conditions of taking that remedy are that we are not we also, remove ourselves.
Yeah,
from the
avocation
ability to
is, I always
participate.
get that word, it's abdication, right.
Abdication easement, or?
Right.
Well, okay, that was
I'm
another.
thinking of abdicating rights.
Abdicating.
Yeah, well,
Well,
one
no,
of
if basically we sign away that right
So
by
no,
taking one form of
we
remediation.
don't,
and
again, I think on municipal properties or schools, are different, and we would want to make sure that we would not want to be doing that.
Right.
For the foreseeable future, if we're doing sound insulation, we still want to have all the rights and options if in fact something else happens in the future, and we haven't put something in a property deed that doesn't allow us to do it, so. But I think, there's some movement happening, and again, they've been generally responsive, although not yet.
I guess just to be clear then, that was the new fact and circumstance that has transpired in just the last, month.
Yeah.
That the FAA provided funding for those new maps, that, prior to, I think, March, that was not.
And Steve, he was at the last meeting, and again, the Technical Advisory Committee meeting has actually been put on hold because of this, right?
Right.
Which was also a surprise to us a little bit as well. So there was a lot of information that came out of this last meeting that Steve was at, and again, I appreciate you being there, and you also, your notes were helpful, which included exactly what you just said. And I think it's really important for, community to have the conversation and to know what's going on here. Yeah. Thanks.
Any other questions on that?
So, in the last part of this is just a committee update on the master planning work, and so, we've got, John Stewart's continuing to help with some of this, pulling this together, but we've got the two board members that have been instrumental in helping kind of provide additional clarity that they think will be helpful to inform you, the board, upon, the delivery of kind of my recommendations and thoughts, that you'll then be able to take that from me in a concise way and make some decisions around that next step. So, I think we have 3 additional meetings. I think so, yep, Monday afternoon, yep. And I think we have 2 other meetings.
That was Monday morning.
Yeah, it is Monday morning, actually.
Oh, I have it down as the afternoon.
It's a Monday, Martin, I know that.
Because I had said, remember, you and I had this conversation
Oh.
about the afternoons from 1 to 3 are just not.
Right, so I think it got rescheduled.
So what time
I
is it?
had said no, as you had asked, for me to just decline those.
Yes, I
could
haven't.
do morning only.
I don't see that that's yet been rescheduled on my calendar yet, so.
Okay, well,
we'll
you're
need
welcome to
work
go
on it.
without me, it would be great to have the materials, but yeah, 1 to 3 is just not possible because it's that transition time with
Yep.
school
Can we
and
do it
everything.
at 8:30 or 9?
8:30 would be great, or 9, whatever. would be-
I will, we'll send out a meeting request.
Yeah, the one I said I could do in the afternoon was, I think, April 30th, which was in a few weeks, because I do have, it was April 30th or somewhere later in
Mhm.
the month, and just, things change for me then, but,
Okay,
but yeah, for most of April, I need morning meetings if possible.
yep, great. Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to Agenda 14, Policy Review, Executive Limitations Policy 2.4. We had a first reading of Detail Policy 8, specifically a wording change there.
Yeah, and John, this was specific to surplus.
Very minor, but I just think the word surplus should come out, and the word fund balance should go in, the audit convention, if you will.
Yep.
And do we have to go through other readings then on that because of it?
Yeah, we should, just to let people know, yeah.
All right. So we're going to table
15.
agenda item 15. right now, so we'll move to other paper articles.
Oh, can I ask one question? I'm sorry, about item 15. And it just has to do with being prepared for the next time. The links that are in there to current curriculum don't seem to work anymore. They seem to be to like old websites or something. At least I couldn't manage to follow them. Is there a way to get us a link that works so that we can just have a look before we talk about curriculum?
It could be with the website change that.
I think that's what it
made
is,
updatable,
yeah.
so-
Yeah, it would be great if before we actually have it on the agenda, it would be
Yep.
good.
Will do.
Could I ask the members to kind of pull that out of your packet? So this, it's pretty substantial, so we don't have to get
Reprint
this,
it.
copies of this again. You're welcome, Delina.
So we'll send you the links.
That'd be
is what
great.
we'll do.
Yeah, just an email is fine, just something that, so that we know where to find the information.
Yep.
Okay, so other paper articles. What will run tomorrow, as I already indicated, is on school safety and security. And I penned that very last minute. So we currently have Martin on the 531 submission on a legislative update. Does that still make sense, Martin?
Yes.
Time-wise? Okay. So that means we've got one in the interim, which
Adjourned by then, right?
I will be adjourned by then.
which is
I'll have
due
forgotten everything we've done.
on April 26th, and will run in the May 3rd issue.
I see Alex M. needs to be on there. I haven't seen his name on there in a little while.
And there's a number of topics that are for consideration. I'd like to maybe get one more after Martin, too, so we've got a little bit of a queue going here. So we'll have an early May submission, or publication, and then we will have an early July publication.
I could wait for the early July. Early May is just a rough time of year, so.
Well, let's maybe talk about topics first, because that might influence authorship, too.
Yeah, okay.
Any opinions on the early May issue?
Who's writing it?
Well, I think Elizabeth just said we should figure out maybe what the topic
What
is,
would
and
be
then
a- Well,
who
if we
would be
get
the
a
right
topic
person.
to-
Yeah.
A relevant topic first.
Or we can figure out who the writer is and.
We could do that.
That person can decide what Alex wants to write about.
I see other topics, among them is education spending. I'm willing to take another crack at
Do we even know
education
what,
funding one.
do we even know?
don't-
We won't know
We
until
won't-
May.
we won't know the
about
new
education
formula,
funding.
so-
That may be old information by May.
It might be, yeah.
How about faculty bargaining? We talked about that.
I'd like to do that too.
Yeah, we're kind of coming into the,
Yeah, we have to be careful on,
Well, what are you gonna?
well, no, just on topics. If it's a topic that, if it's advocating what we're doing in the negotiation, I know a long time ago when we set this up that, that the other paper did not want to have something like that where somebody would have to respond to what we're,
Right.
it's supposed to be purely informative.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't, and I think if you get into negotiations articles, that might be a little,
okay.
yeah, I mean,
No, that's a good point. I guess, yeah, what you're suggesting is it would be very hard to write a generically informative article without
right.
sounding like.
If we
Okay.
want to write an editorial type,
I
we can
think
pay
that's
for the
fair.
space, yeah.
I think that's fair.
Timing-wise, we'll have a month, well, it'll be the month before school wraps up. We won't have enough on the legislative update. I'm trying to think.
You know, there's a lot that goes on end of the year around recognition, student outcomes, achievements, you know, I don't know.
Yeah.
Things, you have student reps that are moving on, or a student rep that's moving on. I don't know, you could do some level of information about successes. I don't know. I'm trying to help with ideas, but we're a school and we're culminating a school year and.
It could be on student outcomes. That could also be a July one, too. We will also have several new personnel, too. I wonder if that's an
Meet.
opportunity to
Introduce and welcome or something.
That could be good, yeah. That
Mhm.
could be good.
Mm-hmm.
Alex, would you feel comfortable writing kind of, it's sort of along with recognition, but really kind of a introduction to new staff?
Sure.
Let's put that as a placeholder right now. And then how about an early July publication? We could do student outcomes there.
Do you want to write about student outcomes in early July?
What's that?
I'm happy to do that one. I think, yeah. I think I'm due by that point.
Well, that's true.
All right. We can modify the topics as
As we go, yeah.
we get a little bit closer, but let's put those as placeholders. So we have introduction to staff, Alex, 426 submission, Martin, 531 legislative update, and I don't have a date on the late June, but for publication in early July, Bridget on student outcomes. All right. That's good. We've got a queue going.
Yeah.
All right.
So it doesn't have to write it overnight.
That's really good. All right, we have the board self-evaluation discussion, and we've put this off once, I know. What you have in front of you is the tool we've used in the past, and it encompassed two elements. One was, which is actually on the back page, was really an evaluation of the meeting itself. And the second one was more feedback to the superintendent from a particular meeting. So I guess the question here is, the challenge with this over the years has been it's not necessarily very actionable, in that you don't necessarily see a trend that requires continuous improvement in any way. So it's really a situational or an event analysis in the moment of a specific meeting.
That was going to be my feedback looking at. Is there a place, I don't think I've experienced it, where we have a broader step back that says, here were some processes that we ran this year, over the course of the year, or over the course of the last, it might straddle a year. Or here are some things that, just some learnings, here are some things that went well, here are some things that we could have done better. Because this seems, as you said, very, very specific. Right. And I remember being in the audience when you guys handed these out, because we haven't done it in a really long time. And sort of feeling like this is kind of an awkward thing to fill out as a community member who goes to a meeting like every, couple of months maybe. It feels very strange. And does that give us enough feedback to really change any processes that we have as a board? I would almost envision more, almost a rubric of things that the community expects from us. So Wendell's in the audience, so I'll say it, transparency. How are we doing on transparency, and where are we doing well, and where can we do more? Things like getting input from various stakeholders. I'm literally brainstorming at the moment, and I hadn't really thought through it more than that. But it just feels like specific meeting evaluation is such a tiny part of what the work actually is that we're doing, and where we could improve or not improve. Because our meetings seem to follow a very specific, well ingrained pattern, sort of tried and tested and all of that, and the production of information from the office, before we get here, the things that could be tweaked around the edges. But some of those bigger concerns about transparency and soliciting community input on big decisions and those kinds of things are things that, as a community member, I would want to see us evaluating ourselves on. And I'm sure the community would love to have input on that too. Yeah.
So transparency process.
This thing was, you were being diplomatic. This was useless, waste of time. It was at the end of the night when we're all tired and we learned nothing from it. So, but I like.
How do you really feel about it?
But I like Bridget's idea of we should occasionally kind of say, all right, let's look at how we're doing on community outreach. How are we doing on transparency? And actually set some time aside I don't know when we'd set it aside when we're not tired and grumpy, or at least for me, that is. But, and think of some other topics as far as direction to the superintendent and those kind of things. I think that would be, that could actually be useful.
Well, it could be helpful for future boards, knowing that we're not always going to be here, to sort of have someplace documents that show where we struggled or where we felt like we did well, and things that, it would almost be like advice for future people too as well, not
Is that
just.
almost like not a quarterly, or like, is it a twice a year type thing that you might want to do, or, do it into our monitoring, kind of factored into our calendar, where we would look at?
Yeah, I would say once or twice a year. I mean, I feel like we would need to do it with each board as it's configured, to sort of have a look back maybe, so sort of toward the end.
So maybe, David, you and I could take a pass at developing what the topics would be, or what that rubric, as you were saying, might look like. Because I think we could generate the topic areas for the rest of the board to respond to, and then sort of how there would be an evaluation, and how we might seek out additional input on the evaluation. Because a self-evaluation on transparency is only as good as,
Right.
that's a good example where we would require outside feedback on that.
Right.
From Wendell, at least.
Yeah.
He shares that at least with me without asking, and it's always helpful, so.
Or Bob in the back.
No, Bob in the back.
Any comments from the public on board self-evaluation?
I think I would agree a lot with what's been said.
All right.
It's sometimes not valuable to evaluate a meeting, and certainly used to do a lot of very deep self-evaluation after every single negotiating session, but.
That's true.
All right, so we'll take a pass at something for the board to react to as a rubric, and then at a minimum, sort of create an annual review cycle. I'm giving us more work now.
Yep.
All right, we'll move on to agenda item 18, which is set the agenda for the April 18th meeting.
I think we're okay, we've got those back on there at 11.
Okay. I think we don't, do we need the conflict of interest code of conduct?
Well,
I think we did those.
we've kept it on just because we wanted to make sure that, I don't think we did them.
Oh, we're reviewing it as a
Yeah.
reading,
Right.
okay.
It's a policy review.
Okay, it's policy review, gotcha.
So with respect to policies, are we going to look at the new policy for student publications, which is, we just got a model policy from the Vermont School Board Association based on the law that was passed last year related to this topic. Free speech in students and student publications. There's that model policy. It doesn't have to,
It's not.
it doesn't have to be next.
Is it? I don't believe it's required.
I don't know that if it's required, but I would strongly urge us to have it. We can bring it out and look at it for first reading, and we can decide, no, we don't want to adopt it, but
Look at it.
I'll have to double check and see if it's even required. It may.
Is that will that be a mandated policy?
That's
Well,
what I'm not
That's what
sure.
you don't
Not-
know. Okay.
I think it is. I think it is a mandated policy.
We'll check,
But
Martin.
yeah.
That's fine. Okay.
So,
Would you-
to have the LOI on here?
Oh, yeah.
Well, we certainly
We can put it
hold as a
under city
placeholder.
school collaboration, or put those together for now.
Yeah.
Because I don't think, do we have a meeting before the next meeting? We
No,
don't.
we do not.
We
Not
don't,
yet,
so-
But I think we'll end up needing to
Yeah.
at least reach out to them and see
Rename that.
on
Okay.
the subcommittee.
City school collaboration.
it.
if
All
we
right.
reject
And then
the
under
LOI.
superintendent's report, I was wondering if we could get an update on
City and
enrollment.
school disagreement.
Just because I've been getting questions about that, and whether contingency teachers are gonna be
Yeah, we're
needed or
working on it right now,
allocated and all
actually.
that. It'd just be good to have a little bit of an update before we're
Mhm.
deeper in that discussion.
So do we agree the LOI is going on the agenda?
It'll be
Okay.
covered in the context of agenda item 6. I don't know if it'll show up as a separate.
David, could I just request for that? Could we get your recommendation as to what we should do?
On
On the LOI, yes. Make your recommendation as superintendent.
I'd like to consider pulling 2 items from the future agenda item. Leave of absence guidelines. I'd like to consider putting that under the superintendent's report with maybe a recommendation, or at least discussion points. And then I think the other one, if there's board agreement, and it could be after agenda item 9, would be the staff voice mechanism. I don't know who named it that, but sounds funny, but if we know what we mean anyway.
I think you did.
I think I did too.
Because I think we kept saying teacher voice and some kind of mechanism, and then you broadened it to staff voice, so it kind of came out as
That's
staff
how
voice.
it came out.
I think so. One question I had about master plan. I'm sorry, Alex. I didn't raise my hand.
Sure. Well, thank you. Another future agenda item I'm interested in discussing goes to a policy that we reviewed, I think, in our previous meeting, and that was that the school district shall not accept tuition students unless they are paid from another Vermont school district. And I just read in about the past week or so in an article, I think on 7 Days, about how Burlington is accepting tuition students from China, because apparently an American education is becoming a sought-after experience for people in other countries. And it occurred to me, what if we were to ever run into an excess of capacity? So for instance, if we were to lose a tuitioning town for one reason or another, and we had a lot of capacity and we needed to fill that capacity somehow, perhaps we could consider taking students from foreign countries, which would violate that policy. And I don't remember the number of that policy, but I'm interested in at least having a discussion about it.
Correct me if I'm wrong, though, the policy doesn't say that we won't take tuition students from someplace else. My understanding is that the policy reads, we're not going to take students from other Vermont school districts unless their money comes with them. So, for example,
Right.
we're not going to take someone from Burlington because Burlington has a high school, and so by state law, their tuition funding from the state stays in Burlington.
Yes.
And so then we would basically, as South Burlington taxpayers, be paying for that student to come here. And so I think that's how the policy reads. I don't know that there's anything.
There's a
in it
lot
that
of different
precludes.
layers of tuition and out-of-country tuition. You know, there's required processes and CVIT, it's all about foreign student exchange criteria. And so it's not as simple, and there's a lot of factors that go into that. In addition, also our tuition processes that we've had before, where we had previous agreements. We had agreements to do those things. When Act 129 came along, that abolished the ability for that to happen, although we still can enter into separate agreements. But you need to have some consistency across, otherwise it creates some significant change. I'm happy to put it on a future agenda item. Again, I think we don't necessarily know what will happen as a result of Act 46, a merger and all that stuff.
Well, tell you what, let me review that policy, and perhaps on the 18th, I'll request to add it as an item for a subsequent meeting, perhaps in May.
Steve, you had a comment?
Yeah, no, actually, I appreciate that, Alex. If you want to study it a little bit more
Yeah.
and then decide whether you think it could bear fruit. But I just wanted to caution from experience in higher ed. I mean, a lot of schools think going to China is going to solve their problems. And it's true, because, you've got 1 billion people and, potentially tens of millions of students, a lot of whom, are willing to pay full freight, no discounting, nothing. It just, you got to be, I think, number one, it's volatile. So if you get sort of a change in the perception overseas of the degree to which the United States is welcoming people from overseas, you can have tremendous variations in those folks from year to year. And number two is you just can't underestimate the infrastructure that you have to provide when you're getting somebody who's maybe not an English language speaker.
Well, speaking of that, the article did mention that the language barrier sometimes came up. These kids are not always fully fluent in English. so.
Right, and I'm just thinking as far as a mission, like I could see where, you know, suddenly we'd be spending a fair amount of our very precious time on, you know, very incremental thing. So, but if you're gonna do a little independent research, I'm happy to.
I will. Thank you.
Bridget, I'll raise my hand again. Master planning and visioning, it occurs to me that April 18th would be our last board meeting before that April 30th deadline. And so the question is whether we need to discuss that deadline or whether we think we'll be prepared for it, to have something to sort of sign off on to meet that resolution. I just don't know if that needs to be an added bullet or whether we can just cover it in general without having to add a bullet, but it does occur to me this is our last sort of regular chance unless we scheduled a special meeting or had something
I think
different.
so April 30th was on the weekend, I think, actually, that's set in the thing, so.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what would be logical is to try to go to the first May meeting.
May 4th, I think.
For May 2nd,
For
you know,
2nd.
which would be, I mean, again, I'm not trying to push off significantly
So
the April 30th,
maybe
but.
we say May 2nd deliverable as
Right.
part of that.
So again, I was gonna
Yeah.
bring that up as,
Okay.
again, I'm not wanting to not be compliant on the 30th, but.
You need a motion that May 2nd counts for the purpose of.
All right, so by default, unless anybody has anything else we want to consider adding to future agenda items, we have discussed both 18 and 19. So we'll move to agenda item 20, consider the minutes of the March 21st meeting. Any changes or comments?
But they were generally fine. It was a teeny tiny one on page 5 that I saw. It says, we sent a letter to the House Ways and Means Committee requesting that the changes not affect the budgets that were in front of committee members. That was a little confusing. I think what we meant was community members, because we were talking about budgets that had already been approved by, but it was a tiny thing. It didn't really affect our
So
decisions.
community,
Not committee members, yeah.
So with that change, we have consensus, those minutes are approved. All right, we will move on to the consent agenda. We have a pretty robust agenda. Do you want to walk through
Sure.
this?
So, and under some hires, I'll do some, quick highlight. Obviously, there are some moving parts and rehires on the hires. There is a new assistant principal being recommended to you tonight, name of John Craig, and in your packet was an outline similar to what I did for, or what we did for you for the director of learning position. So again, that's an important hire. Again, I thank the board for assisting and helping to get out, for us to get out contracts and get those signed. That's been a big part of where we are today. In addition, as I said, we've got some moving increases, Carrie Farrell to increase, and then some added components here and the others. The other part I want to just spend some time on, so both the resignation and retirements, and I would be remiss not to just mention all 4 of the names. Ed Darling, John Luce, Denise Parker, and Rich Wise. Again, a lot of history here, a long time teaching and providing instruction to our students. And, you know, obviously, they will be missed and have provided a lot of, as I said, great service to the district. So on your behalf, we will certainly write them letters and thank them on your behalf. But again, I think it's appropriate to recognize them.
Yeah, that's probably combined experience there is
A few years,
over
yes.
100
Well, I was gonna say over
years,
100
right?
years, yeah.
Over
Yeah.
100 years, yeah.
Yeah.
That's it alone.
You did not hear that from me. All right, there's no action required, but any questions or comments for clarification? All right, we'll welcome our new members to the team and thank the retirees for their lifelong service in many cases. All right, any questions on agenda item 22, AP orders 37 and 38? Any questions? All right, and agenda item 23, there's an AP order check to Howard Center in the amount of $58,851.55.
I move that we approve the check to Howard Center for $50,851.55.
And do we need any discussion or clarification on purpose? I think we're familiar with these now. All in favor?
Aye.
The motion passes. Do we have a second? Oh, I have one quick update. Delina gave me a note that May 17th works for the board workshop and retreat. So can we send a meeting invite out? Okay, May 17th, 6 to 9 p.m.
So it's May 17th, 6 to 9?
All in favor to adjourn?
Aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.